On the night my stepmother finally snapped and slapped me hard enough to send my earrings skittering across the marble floor, everyone assumed I would back down. Instead, my grandmother pulled me into the shadows, pressed a cold key into my palm, and whispered 12 words that overturned our family fortune. By the time the truth surfaced in a law office 3 weeks later, my stepmother was in handcuffs, and every smug smile she had ever given me became criminal evidence. My name is Tessa Calder, and until the night of my father's 61st birthday, I had spent the better part of a decade trying to make myself invisible. I had mastered the art of being present without occupying space, of standing in the corners of ballrooms like a piece of unoffensive furniture, of speaking only when spoken to and smiling until my jaw ached. I am the director of cybersecurity at Orion Shield Analytics. In my professional life, I command teams that hunt down digital threats, dismantle firewalls, and expose vulnerabilities that corporations would pay millions to keep hidden. I am precise. I am cold. I am untouchable. But the moment I stepped across the threshold of the Kingsley Grand Hotel in Port Armitage, Oregon, none of that mattered. Here, under the crystal chandeliers and the heavy scent of lilies that barely masked the smell of old money and stagnation, I was just the daughter, the obstacle, the reminder. The Kingsley Grand was the sort of place that prided itself on not changing. The carpets were a deep, suffocating burgundy, and the walls were paneled in mahogany that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that required mink stoles and suit jackets, a frigid preservation tank for the city's elite. My father, Richard Calder, was celebrating his 60th birthday, though the event felt less like a celebration of life and more like a coronation for his wife. Vivian! She stood by the entrance to the grand ballroom. Her fingers dug into my father's bicep with a possessiveness that looked like affection to strangers, but felt like a shackle to anyone paying attention. Vivian was beautiful in the way a freshly sharpened knife is beautiful. She was wearing a gown of crushed silver velvet that clung to her frame, catching the light with every calculated movement. Her hair was a platinum helmet of perfection, her makeup flawless, her smile tight and unyielding. She looked at my father with adoration, but her eyes were constantly scanning the room, tallying net worths, assessing threats, and ensuring that the narrative of the perfect Calder family remained unbroken. I wore black. It was a simple sheath dress, silk, high-necked, long-sleeved. It cost $2,000, but the point of it was to disappear. I had pulled my dark hair back into a severe chignon, exposing my neck. Wearing only a pair of pearl drop earrings that had belonged to my mother, I approached them with the caution of a bomb disposal technician. "Tessa," my father said, his face lighting up with a warmth that was genuine, if weak. "You made it. I was worried work would keep you." "I would not miss this, Dad," I said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. He smelled of scotch and the expensive cologne Vivian bought for him, a scent that was too musky, too aggressive for a man as gentle as he was. "You look sensible," Vivian said. Her voice was a low purr, the kind that vibrated in your chest. She did not look at my face. She looked at my dress, then my shoes, then my hair. "Though that hairstyle does nothing for your jawline, it makes you look so severe, like a man." "Hello, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Happy birthday, Dad." "Thank you, sweetheart," Dad said, oblivious to the barb. He patted Vivian's hand where it gripped his arm. "Doesn't she look lovely? Viv, I am so proud of her promotion." "Of course," Vivian said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Security, such a masculine field, but someone has to do the dirty work." I excused myself, grabbing a flute of champagne from a passing waiter just to have something to hold. I retreated to the edge of the room, near the string quartet that was murdering Mozart with polite indifference. From my vantage point, I watched them. Vivian controlled the room. She steered my father from donor to business partner, laughing at the right moments, whispering in his ear, guiding him like a puppet. She was the architect of his life now. I was just a remnant of the foundation she hadn't quite managed to bulldoze. The disaster happened 2 hours later. The alcohol had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Great Uncle Arthur, a man who had made his money in timber in the 1980s and had been pickling his liver ever since, stumbled over to the main table where Vivian and Dad were holding court. I was standing nearby, having been summoned by Dad for a toast. Arthur squinted at me, swaying slightly. He held a tumbler of bourbon that was dangerously tilted. He looked from me to Vivian, then back to me, his eyes glassy and confused. "God damn," Arthur slurred, his voice booming over a lull in the music. "It is uncanny." Vivian stiffened. I saw the muscles in her neck cord, tight as violin strings. "Arthur, you are drunk," she said, her voice icy. "Go sit down." "No, look at her," Arthur insisted, pointing a shaking finger right at my face. "The girl, Tessa, she looks exactly like him. That fella in your old wedding photo. Vivian, not Richard, the other one, the dark one." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the ballroom. 200 guests seemed to hold their breath simultaneously. My father blinked, confused, a nervous smile wavering on his lips. "Arthur, what are you talking about?" But Vivian did not speak. She went rigid, her face, usually a mask of carefully applied foundation and arrogance, drained of all color. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than disdain in her eyes. I saw terror, and then, instantly, that terror curdled into a hatred so pure it felt like a physical blow. Her hand, gripping the stem of her champagne flute, turned bone white. She looked at my dark hair, my high cheekbones, the specific curve of my jaw, features I had always assumed were just mine. "Excuse us," Vivian whispered. It was not a request. She moved with terrifying speed, before my father could object, before I could step back. She had clamped her hand around my upper arm, her nails, manicured to sharp points, dug into my flesh through the silk of my dress. She did not guide me. She dragged me. "Vivian," Dad called out, weak and confused. "Girl talk, darling," she threw back over her shoulder, her voice high and brittle. "Just fixing her makeup." She marched me out of the ballroom, down the corridor lined with portraits of dead city founders, and shoved me into the ladies' powder room. It was empty, thankfully. She kicked the door shut and locked it with a violent click. The room was all marble and mirrors, lit by unforgiving vanity bulbs that reflected her distortion back at us a dozen times. She spun on me, her chest heaving. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. "I do not know what you are talking about," I said, rubbing my arm where her nails had left crescent-shaped indentations. "Uncle Arthur is drunk. He is senile." "Do not lie to me," she screamed, her composure fracturing completely. She advanced on me, backing me up against the cold marble of the sink counter. "The hair, the suit. You stood there in the light so everyone would see. You want them to talk? You want them to whisper that I am still obsessed with him?" "Who?" I asked, though a cold dread was pooling in my stomach. "I am wearing a dress. Vivian, I am not wearing a suit." "You look like him," she shrieked. "Evan, you look exactly like Evan. You did your hair like that to mock me. You stare at me with his eyes. You stand there with his judgment. You think you are clever. Tessa, you think because you work with computers you can hack into my head?" "I do not know who Evan is," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "He is your past. Vivian, whatever ghosts you are seeing, they are in your head, not on my face. It is not my fault you are haunted." That was the wrong thing to say. The slap came out of nowhere. It was not a theatrical, movie star slap. It was a vicious, open-handed strike fueled by 10 years of suppressed rage. Her palm connected with my left cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. The force of it threw my head to the side. I felt a sharp, tearing pain in my earlobe as my mother's pearl earring was ripped from my ear. I heard it skitter across the marble floor. A tiny, frantic sound. Click, 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 spin, before it came to rest under a vanity stool. I gasped, my hand flying to my face. The skin felt like it was on fire. I tasted copper in my mouth. My vision blurred for a second, swimming with tears of shock, not sadness. I turned back to look at her, my hand covering my stinging cheek. Vivian stood there, panting, her hand suspended in the air. She did not look sorry. She looked exhilarated. I started to speak, to tell her she was insane, that she had finally crossed the line. She hit me again. This one was harder. It caught the corner of my mouth, snapping my head back against the mirror. The glass vibrated with the impact. A dull throb began at my temple, radiating down into my jaw. "Do not speak to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are nothing. You are a bad copy of a dead man. You exist because your father was lonely and I was available. And do not you ever forget that I own this family. I own the house. I own him. And I can crush you." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was tentative, soft. "Vivian? Tessa? Is everything all right in there?" It was my father. The transformation was instantaneous. It was terrifying to watch. The rage vanished from Vivian's face, replaced in a split second by a look of crumbled devastation. She reached up and pinched the soft skin of her own upper arm, digging her nails in hard, twisting until a red welt bloomed on her pale skin. Then she ruffled her perfect hair, making herself look frazzled. She let out a sob, a wet, pathetic sound. "Richard!" she cried out, pitching her voice so it would carry through the wood. "Richard, please! She is out of control!" I stared at her. The sheer audacity of the lie paralyzed me for a second. She was framing me. She was going to tell him I hit her, and I knew, with a sinking certainty that weighed more than lead, that he would believe her. He always took the path of least resistance, and Vivian was the path he had paved with his own dignity. My cheek throbbed. My ear was bleeding. I looked at the earring on the floor. I did not pick it up. Leaving it there felt like leaving a piece of evidence at a crime scene. I unlocked the door and threw it open. My father stood there, looking anxious, holding a napkin. Vivian was already behind me, burying her face in her hands, sobbing about how I had grabbed her, how I had insulted their marriage, how I was so cruel. "Tessa?" Dad asked, looking at me with wide, confused eyes. He saw the red mark on my face. Surely, he had to see the blood on my ear. But then Vivian wailed, and his eyes snapped to her. "Vivian? Oh, God. Honey, what happened?" I did not say a word. I did not defend myself. I did not scream. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw a man so desperate to maintain his illusion of happiness that he would willingly blind himself to the monster standing next to him. I walked past him. Tessa, wait," he called, but his voice was weak, anchored by Vivian's clutching hands. I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the hardwood. I kept my head high. Though my face burned with shame and pain, I needed to get out. I needed air. I turned the corner toward the service exit, a quiet hallway away from the guest areas, intending to call an Uber and vanish. But someone was waiting for me. Sitting on a velvet bench in the dim alcove of the back hallway was my grandmother, Eleanor Ward, my father's mother. She was 82 years old, a woman made of steel wire and old etiquette. She sat with her back perfectly straight, her hands resting on the handle of her cane. She was not mingling. She rarely mingled anymore. She preferred to watch from the perimeter. A silent observer of the empire her late husband had built, and her son was busy dismantling. I stopped. I tried to turn my face away so she wouldn't see the swelling welt on my cheek, but Eleanor missed nothing. "Come here, Tessa," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of authority that made disobedience impossible. I walked over to her. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by a single sconce that cast long shadows. I stood before her, feeling like a child again. Eleanor reached out with a hand that was paper thin, her blue veins mapping a century of history. She took my chin in her cold fingers and turned my face to the light. She studied the handprint Vivian had left on my skin. She did not gasp. She did not coo with sympathy. She did not ask what happened. She knew. Her eyes, pale gray and sharp as flint, hardened. "She finally did it," Eleanor said softly. It was a statement, not a question. She finally lost her mask. "I have to go, Grandma," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I cannot be here." "No, you cannot," Eleanor agreed. She released my chin and reached into the pocket of her heavy wool cardigan. "But you are not running away. Tessa, you are advancing in a different direction." She took my hand, the one that wasn't trembling, and pressed something into my palm. It was cold, heavy, metal. I looked down. It was a silver key. It looked old, simplistic, but the head of it was stamped with a distinct logo, a lighthouse, Harborline Bank. It was a safety deposit box key. Eleanor leaned forward. She smelled of lavender and old paper. She pulled me down until her lips were right next to my uninjured ear. Her grip on my hand tightened, her strength surprising me. "Listen to me," she whispered, her breath cool against my burning skin. "If you have taken a beating for her past, it is time to take back your future." I pulled back to look at her, confused. "Grandma, what is this?" "Box 402, she said. "The password is the date your grandfather died, April 12th, 1985, but you must write it as words, April 12th, 85. "What is in the box?" I asked. Eleanor looked down the hallway, toward the sound of the party, toward the son she had raised and the wolf he had married. When she looked back at me, her expression was terrifyingly calm. "Answers," she said. "The will, the money, and the reason why looking like a ghost is the most dangerous thing you can do in this family. Go now, before she realizes I gave it to you." She pushed me gently toward the exit. I closed my fingers around the cold silver key, the metal biting into my palm. I looked at her one last time, sitting alone in the shadows, a guardian at the gate. Then I turned and walked out into the cold Oregon night, the key burning a hole in my hand, the pain in my cheek forgotten, replaced by the heavy, thrumming realization that the war had just begun. Driving away from the Kingsley Grand that night, with my cheek throbbing and the cold weight of the key in my pocket, felt less like an escape and more like a retreat into a memory I had spent 10 years trying to suppress. The silence of my car was a relief after the suffocating noise of the party. But silence has a way of amplifying the voices in your head. And right then, the loudest voice belonged to a ghost I had never met, but whose face I wore like a stolen mask. To understand why a simple likeness could provoke a slap that echoed like a gunshot, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand that my face has never truly been my own. For the last decade, my reflection has been a battleground. It started 10 years ago. I was 22, fresh out of college, armed with a degree in computer science and the naive arrogance of someone who thinks they can debug the world. I had just landed my first junior analyst role at Orion Shield. My father, Richard, was in a transitional phase of his own. He had just sold off 40% of his stake in the Calder Motors Group, a chain of luxury car dealerships my grandfather had built from a single garage. Dad claimed he wanted to retire early, but looking back, I think he just wanted to clear the decks for Vivian. Vivian swept into our lives like a cold front, bracing, impressive, and utterly chilling. She was younger than him by 15 years, an interior designer with impeccable taste and a history that was curiously vague. I remember the first time I met her. She didn't look at me with the warmth of a potential stepmother. She looked at me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon assessing a tumor. But the real horror show began 3 months after she moved into our family home in Ridgeline Estates. I had come home early one Tuesday to pick up some files I had left in the study. Dad was out golfing, and Vivian was at a spa appointment. The house was silent. I went into the study, which Vivian had already begun to colonize. My mother's old oak desk had been replaced by something glass and chrome. On top of a stack of fabric swatches, a drawer was left slightly ajar. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet hum of suspicion that had been vibrating in my gut since the wedding. I pulled the drawer open. Inside, beneath a checkbook and a passport, was a photograph. It was an old Polaroid, the colors fading to sepia. It showed a man leaning against a railing, maybe on a boardwalk somewhere. He had dark, messy hair and a sharp jawline. He was looking at the camera with a half smile that was equal parts charm and trouble, and he looked exactly like me. I froze. I actually stopped breathing. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a mirror image, transposed across gender and time. The arch of the eyebrows, the specific shape of the chin, the way the eyes crinkled at the corners. It was uncanny. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in Vivian's sharp, angular handwriting, was a single name: Evan. That was the moment the ground shifted. I put the photo back exactly as I found it, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When Vivian came home later that afternoon, I watched her differently, and I realized she was watching me differently too. From that day on, her behavior shifted from cold indifference to a bizarre, suffocating obsession. It started with gifts. She would buy me clothes that were completely out of character for my style but eerily specific: a leather jacket that looked vintage, flannel shirts, heavy boots, things that, I realized later, Evan probably would have worn. "Try it on, Tessa," she would urge, her eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. "You have the bone structure for it. It makes you look strong." When I wore them, just to keep the peace, she would stare at me with a hunger that made my skin crawl. It was a look of twisted nostalgia, as if she were trying to summon a ghost through my physical form. But then, inevitably, the mood would snap. I would say something in my own voice, or laugh in a way that wasn't his, and her expression would curdle into pure loathing. "Take that off," she would snap, suddenly furious. "You look ridiculous. You are trying too hard." I was 22. I didn't understand that I was being cast in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I complained to my father, of course. "Dad, she is weird," I told him one night over dinner, after Vivian had spent 20 minutes criticizing the way I held my fork. "She stares at me. She buys me these clothes and then hates me for wearing them." Dad, drunk on love and his newfound freedom from responsibility, just laughed. He patted my hand, his eyes crinkling with that weak, placating smile I came to despise. "Oh, Tessie, you are overthinking it. She is just trying to bond with you. She never had children of her own. She does not know how to relate to a young woman. Give her time." Time. That was all she needed. Over the next few years, Vivian didn't just redecorate the house. She re-architected our lives. It was subtle at first, like water seeping into a foundation. First, it was the passwords. "We need a unified system for the house security," she claimed. "I cannot remember all these different codes." So the alarm codes were changed to her birthday, then the Wi-Fi, then the safe in the master bedroom. Then came the financial simplification. "Richard, darling," I heard her say one evening, her voice dripping with calculated concern, "it is silly to have so many separate accounts. The fees alone are wasteful. Why don't we consolidate? It will make tax season so much easier for you. You deserve to relax, not worry about statements." Dad, who had always hated paperwork, agreed with relief. He trusted her. He trusted that because she organized his closet by color, she would organize his finances with the same benevolent efficiency. He didn't see that she was building a cage, bar by golden bar. I saw it. I worked in cybersecurity. I knew what a breach looked like. I saw the phishing attempts, the social engineering. Vivian was hacking my father, and she had root access. I tried to intervene. I started monitoring the accounts I still had access to, mostly joint accounts meant for household expenses or old trusts. I saw the withdrawals. $5,000 here for consulting fees, $8,000 there for design retainers. Money was bleeding out of the Calder accounts and vanishing into the ether. When I confronted Dad about a $10,000 withdrawal that had no invoice attached, he waved me off. "Vivian handled that, some contractor for the summer house. Stop badgering her, Tessa. You are being paranoid. Paranoid. That was her favorite word for me. I became the silent fixer when Dad's investments, schemes Vivian brought to him, inevitably failed. I covered the losses. I was climbing the ladder at Orion Shield, making good money, and I poured it quietly back into the family holes to keep Dad from seeing how fast the ship was sinking. I paid off the credit card bills he forgot. I covered the property tax on the lake house when the notice was lost in the mail. I did it because I loved him. I did it because he had raised me alone after Mom died when I was 6. Juggling a grieving toddler and a growing business, I owed him. But every check I wrote felt like paying a ransom to a kidnapper who lived in the guest room. Whenever I pushed back against Vivian directly, she would pull the Evan card. She never said his name, but she weaponized the resemblance. "You are so ungrateful," she would hiss when we were alone in the kitchen, her voice low so Dad wouldn't hear from the living room. "Always questioning, always suspicious, people with faces like yours. They always turn on the ones who love them. They take, and then they leave you with nothing." "Who are you talking about? Vivian?" I would ask, my heart pounding. "Who is people like me?" She would never answer. She would just look at me with that chilling mix of desire and disgust, then turn back to her wine. "Just be careful, Tessa. History has a way of repeating itself if you do not cut out the rot." The only person who remained impervious to Vivian's toxic gravity was my grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor Ward lived in the in-law suite on the ground floor for the first 3 years of Vivian's reign, before moving to an assisted living facility by choice, or so she said. I suspect she moved to escape the air Vivian breathed. Eleanor was old money, old manners, and old steel. She watched Vivian with the polite detachment of an anthropologist studying a cannibalistic tribe. She never fought Vivian openly. She accepted the tea Vivian poured her, nodded at Vivian's stories about her charity work, and signed the birthday cards Vivian put in front of her, but she never warmed. I remember one afternoon, finding Eleanor in the garden, pruning roses with violent precision. Vivian was inside, loudly directing movers who were taking away my mother's old piano to make room for a statement sculpture. "Why do you let her do it, Grandma?" I asked, sitting on the stone bench. "Why don't you tell Dad what she is?" Eleanor didn't look up. She snipped a dead head off a yellow rose. "Because your father is a man who needs to be needed, Tessa. He is weak in the way that kind men often are. If I force him to choose between his mother and his wife, he will choose the wife, because he thinks I am strong enough to survive the rejection, and she is too fragile to handle it." "She is not fragile," I spat. "She is a predator." Eleanor paused, the shears hovering over a thorn. She looked at me then, her gray eyes unreadable. "Predators have their uses. They clear out the weak. But you must remember, Tessa, even predators can be trapped. You just have to wait for them to get hungry enough to make a mistake." She never defended me when Vivian made her snide comments. She never offered me money when I was covering Dad's debts. She just watched, recording, calculating. I thought she was indifferent. I thought she had given up. I was wrong. There were so many times I almost left. I had job offers in Seattle, in San Francisco. I could have packed my bags, changed my number, and left Richard and Vivian to their toxic waltz. But every time I packed a box, the guilt would strangle me. I would see Dad's face, tired, aging, his eyes clouded with a confusion he couldn't articulate, and I couldn't leave him to her. I was the only witness. If I left, there would be no one left to remember who he used to be. So I stayed. I stayed, and I took the insults. I stayed, and I wore the face of a dead man I didn't know. I stayed, and I let her chip away at my self-esteem, piece by piece, until I felt like I was made of nothing but scar tissue. But the slap at the Kingsley Grand was different. It wasn't just physical violence, it was a breach of contract. For 10 years, the unspoken agreement was that she would wage psychological warfare, and I would endure it. By hitting me, by marring the face she claimed to hate yet obsessed over, she had broken the rules. She had brought the subtext into the text. And standing in that dark corridor with Eleanor, feeling the cold bite of the key in my palm, I realized something that made my blood run cold and hot all at once. Eleanor hadn't been indifferent. She had been preparing. She knew about Evan. She knew about the money. She knew about the manipulation. And she had known, with the terrifying foresight of a woman who has seen everything, that eventually Vivian would snap. Eleanor had been waiting for the violence. She needed the physical act, the undeniable proof of loss of control, to trigger whatever trap she had set. I was the bait. I had always been the bait. My face was the lure that Eleanor had allowed to dangle in front of Vivian for a decade, waiting for the shark to bite. If you have taken a beating for her past, it is time to take back your future. Her words replayed in my mind as I drove toward my apartment, ignoring the speed limit. The past wasn't just a metaphor. It was Evan, whoever he was. Whatever he had done to Vivian, or whatever she had done to him, he was the key. And I had the other key. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out at a red light. The lighthouse logo of Harborline Bank gleamed under the street lamp. It looked innocent, just a piece of shaped metal, but it felt heavy, like a loaded gun. For 10 years, I had played defense. I had patched the holes, put out the fires, and swallowed the poison. I had tried to protect my father by being the shield, but shields get dented, shields get broken. Tonight, the shield was down. I touched my cheek. It was hot, swollen, and tender. I winced. But beneath the pain, a new sensation was taking root. It was a cold, sharp clarity. Vivian thought she had slapped a victim. She thought she had put the ghost back in its place. She didn't realize she had just handed me the weapon I needed to bury her. I turned the car onto the highway, heading not toward my apartment, but toward my office at Orion Shield. I needed a secure line. I needed my tools. And tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, I was going to Harborline Bank to meet the dead man who had been ruining my life. The morning after the party, the first thing I did was not call a lawyer or cry into my pillow. I walked into my bathroom, turned on the harsh overhead vanity lights, and took a photograph of my face. The bruise had bloomed overnight. It was an ugly, mottled thing, purple and sickly yellow, spreading across my cheekbone like a storm cloud. The imprint of Vivian's rings was visible, a faint, jagged scratch near my ear where the skin had broken. I took the photo from 3 angles: front, profile, and close up. Then, I uploaded the files to a secure, encrypted folder on my Orion Shield server, naming the directory with a random string of alphanumeric characters that only I could identify. In my line of work, if it is not documented, it did not happen. Data is the only truth that holds up in court. I applied a layer of color-correcting concealer, then foundation, watching the evidence disappear under a mask of beige pigment. By the time I was finished, I looked normal. I looked fine. But beneath the makeup, the skin was tender and hot to the touch. I sat down at my kitchen island with a black coffee, opening my laptop to start the day. That was when the notification slid across the top right corner of my screen. It was an automated security alert from Harborline Bank. Alert: unusual activity detected on account ending in 4922. Shareholder transfer request pending. My stomach turned over. That was my father's primary holding account. It was the vault where the majority of his remaining shares in Calder Motors Group sat, the legacy my grandfather had built from grease and grit. I had set up these alerts years ago, back when Dad still trusted me to keep an eye on things. Before Vivian convinced him that my vigilance was actually intrusion, they had likely forgotten the alerts even existed, or Vivian simply didn't understand the back end of the banking system well enough to disable them. I clicked the link, bypassing the standard login with my administrative credentials, a power of attorney document that, technically, had never been revoked, only ignored. The screen populated with numbers and transaction logs. I scanned the recent activity, my eyes narrowing as I parsed the data. There was a request initiated at 8:30 in the morning, barely an hour ago, to transfer 15% of the Calder Motors voting stock into a newly formed trust. The trust was named the VRC Family Trust. Vivian, Richard, Calder, But when I drilled down into the trust's registration details, the primary trustee with sole signatory power wasn't Richard Calder. It was Vivian Calder. Dad was listed merely as a beneficiary, a passive recipient with zero control over the asset itself. If that transfer went through, Vivian would effectively control the single largest voting bloc in the company, giving her the power to sway board decisions, sell assets, or liquidate the business entirely without my father's direct permission. I kept digging. I felt the cold, hard focus of a forensic audit settling over me, pushing aside the anger. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 12 months. At first glance, it looked normal. Household expenses, club dues, insurance premiums. But then I saw it, a pattern. Every month, on the 14th and the 28th, there was a transfer. The amounts varied but were always just under the threshold that triggers an automatic federal reporting requirement. $9,500, $8,200, $9,900. They were flowing out of Dad's liquid savings account and into an entity listed as EW Investments, LLC. I paused. EW? Eleanor Ward? For a second, relief washed over me. Was Dad sending money to Grandma? Was he secretly supporting her independence? But that made no sense. Eleanor was wealthy in her own right. She didn't need handouts, and certainly not in structured, sneaky payments. I ran a search on EW Investments, LLC. It was registered in Delaware. A classic move for anonymity, but I had access to corporate databases that went deeper than public records. I traced the employer identification number associated with the LLC. It didn't link back to Eleanor Ward's social security number. It linked to a tax ID registered to an address in a strip mall in Portland. I cross-referenced that address with Vivian's old contacts, the ones I had archived years ago when I merged her phone data with the family plan. The registered agent for the LLC was a man named Marcus Thorne, Vivian's old divorce lawyer from her second marriage. EW didn't stand for Eleanor Ward. It stood for Evan Wright. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. She named her shell company after her dead ex-lover, and she was using it to siphon my father's fortune, dollar by dollar, right under his nose. It was sick. It was a level of psychological depravity I hadn't even given her credit for. She was making my father pay for the life she wished she was living with a dead man. I grabbed my phone and texted my father. I kept it casual, non-accusatory. "Hey, Dad. Saw a weird notification from the bank regarding the Calder Motors shares. Is everything okay? Do you need me to look into it?" The response came 3 minutes later. "Don't worry, sweetie. Vivian is just restructuring some things for tax purposes. It is all under control. She is managing it for me. You know I don't understand these things." I stared at the screen. I don't understand these things. That phrase, he used it like a shield, but it was actually a surrender. It was the exact phrase he had used when he signed the power of attorney over to me years ago. Now, he had handed that weapon to the enemy. My mind raced back to a conversation from 2 weeks ago. I had been at the house for dinner, and I had commented on the new landscaping. Elaborate, expensive topiaries that looked ridiculous against the classic architecture of the house. Vivian had bristled. "You may not like my taste, Tessa," she had snapped, swirling her Chardonnay. "But at least I am doing something to improve the property value. I am the one keeping this house standing, not the people who only know how to write code." I had thought she was being metaphorical. Keeping the house standing usually meant maintaining the emotional labor or the aesthetics, but looking at the bank statements now, I realized she had been literal. I pulled up the county property records. There it was, a quitclaim deed recorded 6 months ago. Richard Calder had transferred the title of the Ridgeline Estates property, the house my mother had designed, the house I grew up in, to Vivian Calder as sole owner for the consideration of $10. He had given her the house. He had given her the company shares. He was funneling cash into her secret LLC. And then, another pattern emerged from the chaos of the data. I pulled up the dates of the major asset transfers. The deed transfer was dated March 12th. The initial setup of the VRC Family Trust was dated June 15th. The first large chunk of cash movement to the LLC was dated September 4th. I opened my calendar and cross-referenced these dates with family events. March 12th, Grandma Eleanor had been admitted to North Shore Memorial for dehydration and confusion. Vivian had been the one to take her. June 15th, Grandma had a fall in the bathroom and needed stitches. Vivian had been the one to find her. September 4th, Grandma had an adverse reaction to a new medication and spent 2 days in observation. Vivian had been the one managing her pill organizer. The correlation was perfect, 100%. Every time Eleanor was incapacitated or removed from the board, a major piece of the Calder legacy changed hands. Vivian wasn't just waiting for opportunities. She was creating them. She was removing the only other person who paid attention, creating windows of chaos during which she could shove papers in front of my father and say, "Sign this, Richard. It is for your mother's care." Or, "Sign this. It protects the assets in case Eleanor's medical bills get too high." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This wasn't just theft. This was systematic dismantling, and it bordered on physical harm. I dialed the number for Marwood and Lane, the law firm that had represented the Calder family for 40 years. I asked for Mr. Henderson, my father's longtime attorney. "Tessa." His voice was warm but strained. "I have not heard from you in months. I need to ask you about the deed transfer on the house." "Mr. Henderson," I said, cutting to the chase. "And the new trust structure." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Tessa, we did not handle those transactions." "What do you mean?" "Your father transferred his files to a new counsel about 8 months ago," Henderson said, his tone thick with professional disapproval. "A Mr. Thorne. We were instructed to forward all documents and cease billing. I tried to reach out to Richard to confirm, but, well, Vivian called me back and said Richard was too stressed to handle the transition personally." Marcus Thorne, the registered agent of the shell company. She had moved the legal oversight to the same man who was helping her hide the money. "And Eleanor?" I asked, my voice tight. "Does she know?" "Eleanor refused to move her personal files," Henderson said. "She is still with us. But Tessa, we have heard reports. The new lawyer has been visiting her at the care facility. He brings papers. He tells her they are standard updates, but when we ask for copies, he claims they are private family matters and refuses to release them." "Thank you. Mr. Henderson," I said. "Do not close our file yet." I hung up and grabbed my keys. I didn't care that I had a strategy meeting at 10 o'clock. I didn't care that my face was throbbing under the makeup. I drove to Ridgeline Estates with the reckless precision of a woman who sees her house burning down. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. It looked like a stranger's property. The new landscaping was aggressive, sharp angles and manicured hedges that felt hostile. Vivian's car, a sleek white convertible bought with consulting fees, was parked front and center. I found them in the sunroom. Dad was reading a newspaper, looking frail and older than his 60 years. Vivian was arranging flowers, snapping the stems with sharp, decisive cracks. "Tessa," Dad said, looking up with a hopeful smile. "To what do we owe the pleasure? I thought you were working." "I am working, Dad," I said, walking straight to the table and slamming my hand down on the newspaper. "I am working on figuring out why you gave Vivian the house." The room went silent. The sound of Vivian snapping a tulip stem echoed like a pistol shot. "Excuse me?" Vivian said. Turning slowly, her face was a mask of offended innocence. "We do not discuss private financial matters like this. Tessa, it is vulgar." "Vulgar is stealing from your husband," I shot back. "I saw the deed. Dad, March 12th, you signed the house over to her. Why?" Dad looked between us, his eyes darting nervously. It is for estate planning." "Tessa," Vivian explained it. "If something happens to me, the probate taxes would be enormous. This way. The house is safe." "Safe from whom?" I demanded. "Safe from me? Because that is the only other heir you have. And what about the transfers to EW Investments? Who is Evan? Dad? Or did she tell you EW stood for everything wonderful? Vivian dropped the shears. They clattered onto the glass table. That is enough, she said, her voice trembling with a manufactured rage. Richard, are you going to let her come into our home, my home, and accuse me of being a criminal? Tessa, please, Dad said, shrinking into his chair. Vivian has my best interests at heart. She takes care of everything. I don't want to worry about money. I just want peace. She is buying her peace with your money, I yelled, my control slipping. She is funneling thousands of dollars a month into a shell company named after her dead ex-boyfriend. She moved the shares. She took the house. And every time she did it, Grandma was conveniently in the hospital. Do you not see the pattern, Dad? She hurts us to pay herself. Vivian walked over to Dad and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, positioning herself as the shield, the martyr. She looked at me with eyes that were hard as diamonds. You are sick, Vivian whispered. You are so jealous that your father found happiness that you invent conspiracies. You want to destroy this marriage because you cannot stand that he loves someone who isn't your mother. This isn't about money, Tessa. This is about you being a sad, lonely girl who looks like a man she never knew and hates herself for it. Dad looked up at me, his eyes watering. Tessa, maybe you should go. You are upsetting Vivian. We can talk about this when you are calmer. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of the truth. He knew, somewhere, deep down in the part of him that wasn't sedated by her lies. He knew, but admitting it would mean shattering his entire world. He chose the lie because the lie was comfortable. I am calm, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I am calmer than I have ever been, but you need to know something. The house is gone, the stocks are going, and she is not done. I turned to Vivian. You think you have covered your tracks because you used a shell company and a dirty lawyer? But digital footprints do not disappear just because you delete the browser history. I see you, Vivian. Get out, Vivian hissed. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I walked to my car, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of confirmation. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled the silver key out of my pocket. Yesterday, this key was a mystery. Today, it was a weapon. Eleanor hadn't given me a diary or a sentimental locket. She had given me the Rosetta Stone. If Vivian was systematically draining the family accounts, and if she was timing it with Eleanor's health crises, then whatever was in Box 402 at Harborline Bank wasn't just about the past. It was the ledger. It was the proof that Eleanor had been tracking the theft in real time. The slap was just the distraction. The insults about my face were just the camouflage. The real violence was on the spreadsheets. I started the engine. I wasn't going back to the office. I was going to the bank. And then I was going to find the one lawyer in this town who hadn't been bought by Vivian Calder. You want a war? I whispered to the empty car. I am going to bring you a nuclear winter. The Harborline Bank Central Branch was a fortress of limestone and polished brass in the center of the financial district, a building designed to make you feel small and your secrets feel safe. I walked in at 9:15 in the morning, wearing dark sunglasses to hide the concealer on my cheek and a trench coat that felt like armor. I approached the desk, the silver key burning a hole in my pocket. The bank manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had known my grandfather, was not there. Instead, a young woman with a tight ponytail and efficient eyes greeted me. I need to access a safety deposit box, I said, sliding the key across the marble counter. Number 402. She took the key, checked the number, and typed it into her terminal. I waited for her to ask for the owner's name, prepared to give Eleanor's details and the power of attorney I hoped was still valid. But she didn't ask. She looked up at me with a polite smile. ID, please, Ms. Calder. I handed her my driver's license, confused. You know who I am? Of course, she said, scanning the card. You are the primary account holder for Box 402. It was opened in your name 5 years ago. I froze. 5 years ago. That was right around the time Vivian had started isolating Eleanor, cutting off her phone access and monitoring her visitors. Grandma must have come here, alone, perhaps on one of the few days she was allowed out for shopping, and set this up. She had put it in my name so that if anything happened to her, if she died, or if she was declared incompetent, Vivian could not touch it. It was a failsafe, a time capsule buried in a vault of steel. "Right," I managed to say, my voice steady. "Of course." She led me into the vault. It was a massive, windowless room lined with floor-to-ceiling metal drawers. The air was cool and smelled of dust and stale electricity. She unlocked the box with her master key and my silver key, pulled the long metal drawer out, and carried it to a private viewing room. "Take your time," she said, closing the door behind her. I was alone. The room was small, lit by a single fluorescent strip that hummed with a low, irritating buzz. I sat down at the wooden table and stared at the gray metal box. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the throbbing in my cheek. I lifted the lid. I expected jewelry. I expected maybe a stash of emergency cash or the pearl necklace my mother had worn on her wedding day. Instead, I found paper. It was a stack of thick, manila envelopes, each one sealed with red wax, looking like something out of a 19th century novel. On the front of each envelope, in Eleanor's spidery, unmistakable handwriting, was a single word or phrase. Vivian, Evan, the marriage, Calder Motors, Tessa. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs. This wasn't a savings account. It was an investigation. I reached for the envelope marked Vivian first. My hands were trembling as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a sheaf of photocopied documents. They were court records from the Superior Court of Arizona, dated 12 years ago. I started reading, and the blood drained from my face. State of Arizona versus Vivian Wright. Wright, that was Evan's last name. She had been married to him, or at least, she had taken his name. The documents were a petition for a restraining order filed by Evan Wright against Vivian Wright. The details were nauseating. He detailed a pattern of extreme financial coercion, isolation from family members, and physical outbursts. There were photos attached, grainy, black and white photocopies of bruises on a man's arm, a cut on his forehead. I flipped the page. There was a dismissal order filed 3 weeks later. The reason? Petitioner withdrew complaint. Below that was a foreclosure notice for a property in Phoenix, followed by a bankruptcy filing for a small architectural firm Evan had owned. Vivian had drained him. She had ruined his credit, taken his house, and isolated him until he had no resources left to fight her. I opened the second envelope, Evan. This one contained a police report. It was dated 6 months after the restraining order was withdrawn. Deceased, Evan Wright. Cause of death, accidental drowning. He had been found in a drainage canal 2 miles from their foreclosed home. The report cited a blood alcohol level of 0.15, accidental, tragic, a man who had lost everything drinking himself into a stupor and falling into the water. But the margins of the report were covered in red ink. Eleanor's handwriting. Note the bruising on the wrists, post-mortem or defensive. She had written next to the coroner's description of the body, note the life insurance policy payout date. I turned the page. There was a copy of a payout authorization from a massive insurance provider, $150,000, paid to the sole beneficiary, Vivian Wright. She had cashed him in. I felt sick. The resemblance, the reason she hated me, the reason she obsessively bought me his clothes, wasn't just about a lost love. It was about guilt. I looked like the man she had destroyed. Every time she looked at me, she saw the ghost of her own crime staring back. No wonder she wanted to crush me. I was the walking evidence of her sin. I pushed the horror aside and opened the third envelope, the marriage. This was a copy of the prenuptial agreement between my father and Vivian. I had never seen it. Dad had told me it was standard boilerplate. It was not boilerplate. Eleanor had clearly forced her lawyers to insert clauses that my father, in his love-struck haze, probably hadn't even read. I scanned the legalese until I found Section 9, circled in that same aggressive red ink. The forfeiture clause. It stated, in clear, undeniable legal terms, that if the spouse, Vivian, was found by a court of law to have committed any act of physical violence, emotional abuse resulting in medical treatment, or financial malfeasance against the principal, Richard, or any of his lineal descendants, all rights to the marital assets would be immediately forfeited. Lineal descendants. Me. Eleanor had set a trap. She knew Vivian was volatile. She knew Vivian was abusive. She had inserted a clause that turned Vivian's own nature against her. If Vivian ever hit me, if she ever stole from me, the prenup would strip her of everything: the alimony, the house, the shares. The slap at the Kingsley Grand wasn't just an assault, it was a breach of contract worth millions of dollars. I opened the fourth envelope, Calder Motors. This was the most complex one. It contained trust documents for something called the Ward Family Preservation Trust. I read the declaration of trust. My father had transferred 40% of his voting shares into this trust 10 years ago, right before he married Vivian, likely at Eleanor's insistence. He thought it was just a way to manage taxes. But the trustee structure was unique. Eleanor was the primary trustee, but in the event of her incapacity or death, the successorship didn't go to Richard. It didn't go to Vivian. It went to me. I checked the date. This trust predated the VRC family trust Vivian had set up by 5 years. Legally, the shares Vivian was trying to transfer right now didn't even belong to Richard to give. They belonged to the Ward Trust. They belonged to Eleanor. And if Eleanor was deemed incapacitated, which Vivian had been working so hard to prove with her constant hospitalizations, the control didn't fall to Vivian, it fell to me. I held the power. I had held it for years and didn't even know it. Vivian had been scrambling to steal a kingdom that had already been willed to the princess. Finally, I reached for the last envelope, Tessa. It was lighter than the others. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream stationery. My dearest Tessa, if you are reading this, 2 things have happened. First, I am no longer able to protect you myself, likely because that woman has finally managed to drug me into silence or lock me away in a facility where I cannot reach the phone. Second, she has finally hurt you. I knew she would. I saw the way she looked at you the first day she walked into our house. You have his face. Tessa, I did my research. I hired the investigators. I know about Evan. She killed him, in every way that matters. Long before he went into that water, she consumes people. She finds kind, weak men like your father, and she eats them from the inside out. But you are not weak. You are my granddaughter, and you have the one thing she cannot manipulate. You have the face of her guilt. She will hit you eventually. She will not be able to help herself. The guilt will rot inside her until it turns into violence, and when she does, you must not do what Evan did. You must not retreat. You must not be silent. Use these papers. Use the prenup. Use the trust. I have built a weapon for you, but you are the one who has to pull the trigger. Do not go to Henderson. He is a good man, but he is slow and he is loyal to your father, which means he is vulnerable to Vivian. Go to Lydia Hart at Marwood and Lane. She is young. She is hungry. And she is the only one I trust. She has the originals of everything in this box. She has been waiting for your call. Take back our family. Tessa, make her pay for every bruise. Love, Grandma. I put the letter down. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold calm had settled over me, absolute and terrifying. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the fluorescent light. I thought about Evan Wright, dying alone in a canal because he didn't have a grandmother like Eleanor. I thought about my father, smiling vaguely at the dinner table, while his wife siphoned his life savings into a ghost company. I thought about the sting on my cheek, the way my head had snapped back, the earrings skittering across the floor. Vivian thought she had slapped a child. She thought she had asserted dominance. She was wrong. She had just handed me the keys to her own execution. I gathered the papers. I didn't put them back in the box. I put them in my leather satchel, organizing them by order of lethality. The police report first, the court records second, the prenup third, the trust documents last. I walked out of the viewing room. The clerk looked up. "Did you find what you needed, Ms. Calder?" "Yes," I said. "I found everything." "Will you be terminating the box?" "No," I said. "Keep it active. I might need to store some new evidence in there very soon." I walked out of the bank and into the blinding daylight of Port Armitage. The city looked different now. It wasn't just a collection of buildings and streets. It was a battlefield, and I was no longer a civilian. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for Marwood and Lane. I didn't ask for the main line. I asked for the direct extension Eleanor had written at the bottom of her letter. Lydia Hart, a crisp, sharp voice, answered on the second ring. "This is Tessa Calder," I said. "Eleanor Ward sent me. I have the box." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair being pushed back and a pen hitting a desk. "I was wondering when you would call," Lydia said. "How bad is it?" "She hit me," I said, "and she is trying to move the Calder Motors shares." "Then we do not have time for a consultation," Lydia said, her voice shifting into gear. "Meet me at the office in 20 minutes. Bring the papers. And Tessa?" "Yes?" "Do not let anyone see you. If Vivian knows you have that prenup, she will not just try to hide the money, she will try to destroy it." "Let her try," I said, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt a smile touch my lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the man in the photograph, the smile of a ghost who had just crawled out of the grave to drag his killer down with him. "I am on my way." Lydia Hart did not work out of the main glass and steel headquarters of Marwood and Lane. She worked out of a satellite office in a converted brownstone on the edge of the historic district, a place with frosted glass doors and no receptionist. It was the kind of place you went when you wanted your legal business to remain entirely off the books until the moment you decided to drop the hammer. I sat across from her at a desk made of reclaimed wood that cost more than my first car. Lydia was younger than I expected, perhaps 32, with razor-sharp bobbed hair and eyes that assessed me like I was a line of code she was debugging. She did not offer me tea. She offered me a non-disclosure agreement, which I signed without hesitation. "Eleanor told me you were smart," Lydia said, capping her pen. "She did not tell me you were resilient. Most people would have folded the moment Vivian started her campaign." "I did fold," I admitted, placing the heavy satchel of documents on her desk. "For 10 years. I folded every single day. I thought I was keeping the peace." "Peace is just a pause between wars," Lydia said, pulling the files toward her. "And Eleanor has been preparing for this war since the day Richard brought that woman home. She made me swear not to contact you until you came to me. She wanted to be sure you were ready to pull the trigger. Because once we start this, Tessa, there is no going back. We are not just suing for money, we are dismantling a life." "She hit me," I said flatly. Lydia nodded, her expression professional but grim. "Show me." I pulled up the encrypted photos on my tablet, the high-resolution images of my cheek, the swelling, the cut from the ring. Lydia zoomed in, studying the pixels with the detachment of a coroner. "Good," she said. "It is brutal, but it is good. However, in a he said, she said scenario, Vivian will claim self-defense. She will claim you attacked her. She has likely already planted that seed with your father." "She has," I confirmed. "She staged a scene right after it happened." Lydia leaned back. "The prenup is ironclad. Tessa, Section 9 is the nuclear option. If we can prove physical abuse or financial malfeasance against a lineal descendant, that is you. Vivian loses everything. Not half, everything. And the control of the Calder Motors voting shares reverts immediately to the Ward Family Preservation Trust. That means you become the majority shareholder of your father's company, bypassing him entirely because he is deemed under duress by the terms of the trust." I felt a chill go down my spine. Eleanor had effectively designed a legal kill switch that stripped my father of his power to protect his abuser. "But we need more than photos," Lydia continued. "We need corroboration. Vivian is slippery. She will have an explanation for the money transfers, and she will have a story for the bruise. We need to catch her in the act, or at least prove that her version of reality is a lie. I nodded. This was where I stopped being the victim and started being the director of cybersecurity. I can get the footage from the Kingsley Grand, I said. I know their security vendor. They use a cloud-based retention system that Orion Shield audited last year. I cannot hack it. That would be inadmissible illegal wiretapping. But I can file a priority data preservation request under the guise of an internal liability review. I will have the hallway feed by noon. Lydia smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. Do it. And for the rest? You need to go back into that house. Tessa, you need to let her think she has won. And you need to record everything. I left her office with a plan and a shopping list. My first stop was a specialized electronics store that supplied private investigators. I bought a high-definition button camera. It looked exactly like a standard matte black button on a blouse. It recorded in 4K resolution with high-fidelity audio, storing data on an internal micro SD card that could hold 48 hours of footage. I spent the afternoon integrating the camera into my favorite work blazer. I tested the angles in my bathroom mirror, adjusting the fabric until the lens was invisible to the naked eye, but had a clear view of everything in front of me. I synced the timestamp. I formatted the card. Then, I drove to Ridgeline Estates. Walking back into that house felt like walking into a gas chamber, but this time, I was wearing a mask. I found Dad and Vivian in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Dad looked exhausted, holding a tumbler of scotch. Vivian was pacing, her energy frantic and sharp. I am glad you are back, Vivian said the moment she saw me. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask about my face. She went on the offensive. Your father and I have been discussing your behavior. I came to apologize, I said, keeping my voice low and submissive. I touched the button on my blazer, feeling the silent vibration that confirmed it was recording. I was emotional last night. I should not have caused a scene. Vivian stopped pacing. She looked at me, suspicion warring with triumph in her eyes. She wanted to believe I was broken. It fit her narrative. Well, she said, smoothing her skirt. At least you admit it, Richard. See? I told you she would calm down once she realized how irrational she was being. Dad looked at me with such relief it broke my heart. Thank you, Tessa. That is all we want. Just peace. However, Vivian said, stepping closer to me, invading my personal space. Apologies are cheap. We need to ensure that you do not try to undermine this family again. Richard and I have decided to accelerate the sale of the secondary stock block. We need the liquidity to secure our future. She handed a stack of papers to my father. Sign them. Richard, the buyer is waiting. I should probably have Henderson look at these, Viv, Dad stammered. Henderson is old and slow, Vivian snapped. Marcus has already reviewed them. Do you not trust me? After everything I do for you, after your daughter humiliated us publicly, I am the one trying to pick up the pieces. She turned to me, her eyes cold. And you, Tessa, I know you have been snooping in the accounts. If you try to block this sale, or if you try to tell your father any more lies about where the money is going, I will ruin you. I will tell the board at Orion Shield that you are using company resources to spy on family members. I will have you fired for ethics violations. I will paint you as a mentally unstable stalker who is obsessed with her stepmother's past. I stood perfectly still. The camera on my chest was capturing every pixel of her face, every venomous syllable. She was threatening blackmail. She was admitting to knowing I was watching the money. I understand, I said softly. I will not stand in your way. She smiled. It was the smile of a wolf that has just cornered a rabbit. Good girl. For the next 3 days, I lived in the house like a ghost. I went to work. I came home, and I recorded everything. I captured her berating the housekeeper until the poor woman was in tears. I captured her on the phone with Marcus Thorne, discussing how to hide the assets before the old lady kicks the bucket. I captured her gaslighting my father, telling him he had already agreed to things he had no memory of, making him doubt his own sanity. "You promised me the lake house title last week. Richard," she said over breakfast on Tuesday, "do not tell me you forgot again. We really need to get you to a neurologist." My father looked terrified. I did? I don't remember." "See," she sighed, looking at me with fake sympathy. "He is getting worse." It took everything in me not to scream, but I stayed silent. I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a surveillance node. I was gathering the data set that would condemn her. The climax of the week came on Thursday night. We were having dinner. Vivian had invited the neighbors, the Prescotts, likely to show off her happy family and further isolate me as the sullen outsider. The wine was flowing. Vivian was charming, witty, playing the perfect hostess. I sat at the end of the table, speaking only when spoken to. "Tessa is so quiet these days," Mrs. Prescott chirped. "Work must be stressful." "She is just brooding," Vivian laughed, reaching for the wine bottle. "She has been having some mood swings lately. We are trying to be patient." She stood up to pour more wine for Dad. As she passed behind my chair, she deliberately hooked her foot around the leg of my seat. She stumbled, flailing dramatically. She threw the wine bottle. It smashed against the wall, shattering into 1,000 red shards. "Ow!" Vivian shrieked, falling to her knees. "Tessa, why did you trip me?" The room went dead silent. "Oh my God!" Mrs. Prescott gasped. "Tessa," Dad shouted, standing up. "What is wrong with you?" Vivian was on the floor, clutching her ankle, squeezing out crocodile tears. "I was just trying to pour the wine. She stuck her foot out. She tried to hurt me." I looked down at her. From her angle, she looked like a victim. But from my angle, and from the angle of the camera lens on my chest, the truth was mathematically precise. The camera would show that my feet were tucked under my chair. It would show her looking down, targeting the chair leg, and deliberately engaging the contact. It would show the malicious intent in her eyes a split second before she launched herself into the performance. "I did not touch you, Vivian," I said calmly. "You act like a sociopath," Vivian screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Richard, I cannot live like this. She is dangerous." Dad looked at me, his face twisting with shame and anger. "Go to your room. Tessa, just get out of my sight." I stood up. I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince the neighbors. I walked out of the dining room with the dignity of a queen, knowing that I had just captured the coup de grace. She had staged a physical assault in front of witnesses. She had lied to defamation, and she had done it while I was wearing a wire. I drove straight to Lydia's house that night. We watched the footage together on her large monitor. When the slow-motion replay showed Vivian's calculated glance at my chair leg, followed by the deliberate hook of her foot, Lydia let out a low whistle. "That is it," Lydia said. "That is the behavior pattern, combined with the slap footage from the hotel, which shows her dragging you into the room and you coming out injured, and the financial records. We have a full narrative. She is creating false narratives of abuse to cover her own aggression. It is textbook projection." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Is it enough to pull the trigger?" "It is enough to bury her," Lydia said. "But we wait one more day. The bank transfer for the stock sale is scheduled to clear tomorrow at 5 o'clock. If we serve the injunction at 4:59, we catch her in the middle of the crime. We do not just stop the theft. We prove the intent." The next morning, I had one last stop to make. I went to a small coffee shop on the other side of town, far away from the country club crowd. Eleanor was waiting for me in a corner booth. She looked frail, her skin like parchment, but her eyes were burning with a clarity that defied her age. She didn't hug me. She pointed to the seat opposite her. "You opened the box," she said. "I did." "You read the letter?" "I did." "And?" Eleanor took a sip of her black tea. "Did you find the lawyer?" "Lydia and I are ready," I said. "We have the footage. We have the financial records. We have the button cam video of her staging the fall. We are filing the emergency injunction this afternoon." Eleanor nodded slowly. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I have one question for you, Tessa," she said, "and you must answer it honestly, because once you do this, your father will hate you. He will hate you for destroying his fantasy. He will hate you for showing him that he is a fool. He may never forgive you." She leaned in closer. "Do you have the stomach for that? Are you doing this to get your money back? Or are you doing this to finish what started in that canal 10 years ago?" I thought about Dad. I loved him. I had protected him for so long. But protecting him now meant destroying him first so he could be rebuilt. And then I thought about Evan, the man who died because he didn't have a camera, or a lawyer, or a grandmother like mine. I thought about the way Vivian looked at me, seeing him, hating him, killing him over and over again every time she slapped my face. I looked Eleanor in the eye. "I am tired, Grandma," I said. "I am tired of being the bigger person. I am tired of being the shield. If she hit me because I look like the man she destroyed, then she is going to find out that this time, the ghost hits back." I took a breath, steadying my voice. "I am not doing this for the money. I am doing this for Evan. I am doing this for Dad. And I am doing this for me. I am going to take everything from her, her reputation, her money, her freedom. I am going to leave her with nothing but the truth." Eleanor smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. She patted my hand. "Good," she whispered. "Then let us go catch a predator." The call came at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, shattering the fragile quiet of my apartment. It was not my father's number on the screen. It was Vivian's. I stared at the phone for 3 rings, my heart hammering a warning rhythm against my ribs. Vivian never called me. She texted commands or she complained to my father until he called me. For her to dial my number directly meant the stage was set, the curtain was up, and she needed an audience. "Tessa." Her voice was breathless, tight with a panic that sounded almost genuine. "It is your grandmother. It is Eleanor. You need to come to North Shore Memorial immediately." "What happened?" I asked, already pulling on my jeans, phone pressed to my ear. "We think it is a stroke," Vivian sobbed, the sound wet and ragged. "Or a TIA. She was confused this morning. She could not lift her teacup. I called 911. We are in the emergency room now. Just hurry. Tessa, she is asking for you." I hung up without saying goodbye. I grabbed my keys and the blazer with the button camera sewn into the lapel. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury for people who trust the narrator of their life story. I did not trust Vivian. If Eleanor was in the hospital, it was either because Vivian had put her there, or because Eleanor had decided it was time to force a checkmate. The drive to North Shore Memorial took 20 minutes. I spent every second of it rehearsing my face. I had to be the worried granddaughter. I had to be the scared girl. I could not let Vivian see the shark circling beneath the water. When I arrived at the VIP wing, Vivian would insist on nothing less, not for comfort, but for privacy. The scene was already set. Room 304 was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and lilies. Eleanor was lying in the bed, propped up by pillows. She looked terrifyingly small. Her silver hair, usually pinned up in a severe, elegant twist, was loose against the white pillowcase, making her look frail. Her eyes were closed. An IV line snaked from her arm to a monitor that beeped with a slow, steady rhythm. But it was the people standing around the bed who made my stomach turn. Vivian was there, of course, standing at the foot of the bed, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress that looked mournful, but perfectly tailored. Next to her was a doctor I did not recognize, not Eleanor's usual cardiologist, who was checking a chart with a bored expression. And in the corner, sitting in the visitor's chair with a leather briefcase on his lap, was a man I had never seen before. He was middle-aged, wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny, with a tie that was trying too hard to look expensive. He wasn't from Marwood and Lane. He looked like the kind of lawyer you hired from a billboard on the side of the highway. "Tessa," Vivian whispered, rushing over to hug me. Her perfume was cloying, suffocating. "Thank God you are here. It has been awful." I stiffened but let her embrace me for a second before pulling away. I looked at the man in the chair. "Who is this?" "This is Mr. Sterling," Vivian said, lowering her voice to a respectful hush. "He is a legal consultant. Eleanor asked for him." "Eleanor has been with Marwood and Lane for 40 years, I said, walking past Vivian to stand by my grandmother's side. "Why would she ask for a stranger?" "She was lucid earlier," Vivian explained quickly, her eyes darting to the lawyer. "She was so worried. Tessa, she kept saying she needed to simplify things. She said the old firm was too slow, too complicated. She wanted to make sure everything was settled in case she does not wake up." "I am awake," a voice croaked from the bed. We all turned. Eleanor's eyes were open. They were glassy, heavy-lidded, but when they locked onto mine, I saw it. The spark, the steel. She wasn't gone. She was waiting. "Grandma," I said, taking her hand. It was cold, but she squeezed my fingers with a pressure that belied her frailty. "I am here." "Tessa," she whispered. "Good, you are here." "Mr. Sterling stood up, clearing his throat. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. I recognized the header immediately. Sterling and Associates. The paper was heavy, the font dense. "Mrs. Calder," Sterling said, his voice oily and smooth. "I have the papers prepared as you instructed, the simplified estate plan, the power of attorney transfer. If you could just sign here, and here, we can ensure that Vivian has the authority to manage your care without any bureaucratic delays." He held out a pen. Vivian stepped forward, her hand hovering over Eleanor's shoulder. "It is for the best, Eleanor. You know how hard it is to get approvals with the old trust. This way, I can pay the hospital bills instantly. I can make sure you get the best treatment. We just want to take care of you." I looked at the papers. The top document was a revocation of all previous powers of attorney. The second was a modification to the Ward Family Preservation Trust, appointing Vivian Calder as the sole trustee with unlimited discretionary power. It was a raid, a daylight robbery disguised as medical necessity. I sat down on the edge of the bed, positioning myself between Vivian and Eleanor. I tapped the side of my watch, activating the audio recording. "Grandma," I said softly, looking deep into her eyes, "do you know what these papers are?" Eleanor looked at me. Her gaze flickered to Vivian, then back to me. She took a shallow breath. "Tessa," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "do you think I am doing the right thing?" My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the code. Years ago, when I was a teenager and we were playing chess, she had told me, "If I ever ask you if I'm doing the right thing, it means I have set a trap, and I need you to tell me if the cage door is open." I squeezed her hand. I kept my face open, innocent, the picture of a loving granddaughter. "I think," I said slowly, choosing my words with surgical precision, "that as long as every piece of paper is double-checked as usual, we should trust your judgment." Double-checked as usual. That was the confirm code. I am ready. Lydia is ready. I felt Eleanor relax against the pillows. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. Vivian let out a breath of relief, clearly misinterpreting the exchange. She thought I was capitulating. She thought I was giving my blessing. "Exactly," Vivian said, beaming. "Tessa agrees. See? We are all a family here. Mr. Sterling, please show her where to sign." Sterling stepped forward again, thrusting the clipboard toward Eleanor. "Wait," I said. I did not raise my voice. I just held up a hand. "I have a few questions first, since I'm witnessing this." Vivian's smile faltered. "Tessa, do not be difficult. She is tired." "It will only take a second," I said, turning my chair to face Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, is it? How long have you been representing my grandmother?" Sterling blinked, surprised by the direct address. Well, I was retained recently, given the urgency of the situation." "I see," I said. "And when did you discuss the specific clauses regarding the Calder Motors voting shares? Did you meet with Eleanor privately to go over the liquidation strategy mentioned in paragraph 4? I pointed to a paragraph on the third page that I had read upside down. I was bluffing about the specific paragraph number, but I knew the content was there. Sterling froze. He looked at the paper, then at Vivian. We discussed the general terms of asset simplification. Who is we? I asked sharply. Did you discuss it with Eleanor? Or did you discuss it with Vivian? Mrs. Calder conveyed Eleanor's wishes to me. Sterling stammered. So you have never actually spoken to my grandmother before this moment? I asked, letting my voice rise just enough to carry to the camera hidden in my button. You drafted a will replacing 40 years of estate planning based solely on the instructions of the primary beneficiary? Now see here, Sterling bristled, his face turning red. That is attorney-client privilege. You are not her attorney, I said coldly. You are Vivian's attorney, and you are trying to coerce a medicated woman into signing away a $50 million estate. Tessa, Vivian shrieked. The mask fell. Her face twisted into that familiar, ugly snarl. Stop this. You are killing her. You are stressing her out. Get out. Get out of this room. I am not going anywhere, I said, standing up. And neither is she. Doctor, Vivian yelled, turning to the physician who had been watching silently. Remove her. She is disturbing the patient. The doctor stepped forward tentatively. Miss Calder, perhaps it would be best if... It would be best, a sharp, clear voice cut from the doorway. If everyone stepped away from the patient immediately. We all turned. Lydia Hart stood in the doorway. She was not alone. Beside her was a tall, severe-looking woman wearing a badge on a lanyard, and 2 uniformed hospital security guards. Lydia walked into the room like she owned the building. She slapped a folder down on the bedside table, right on top of Sterling's papers. My name is Lydia Hart, representing Mrs. Eleanor Ward, she announced. This is Officer Miller from the Court of Probate. We are serving an emergency temporary injunction issued by Judge Caldwell 20 minutes ago. Vivian went pale. What? What is this? It is a protective order, Lydia said, her voice cool and professional. Based on credible evidence of elder abuse, undue influence, and financial exploitation, the court has frozen all assets belonging to Eleanor Ward. No documents signed today are valid. No changes to the trust are permitted. And Mrs. Vivian Calder is hereby restrained from making any medical or financial decisions for Mrs. Ward until a full hearing can be conducted. This is ridiculous, Vivian screamed. She looked wild, her eyes darting around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. She is lying. Tessa is lying. She is the one trying to steal the money. She is jealous because I am the one who takes care of this family. She has been plotting this. Actually, Lydia said, nodding to the court officer, we have video evidence. You have nothing, Vivian spat, lunging toward the bed as if to grab the papers. Richard will hear about this. I will have you disbarred. The security guard stepped forward, blocking her path. Mrs. Calder, please step back, the officer said sternly. Get away from me, Vivian yelled, her composure shattering completely. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You little witch, you did this? You think you can win? You are nothing. You are just a copy. You are just a ghost. I stood perfectly still, letting the camera in my button record every frame of her meltdown. I watched her unravel. It was pathetic. It was ugly. And it was over. I suggest you leave, Mrs. Calder, Lydia said, before the officer is forced to escort you. Vivian looked at the guards, then at the lawyer who was hurriedly stuffing his papers back into his briefcase, and finally at me. Her eyes were full of hate, but there was fear there now, too. Real fear. This isn't over, she hissed. She turned and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking furiously on the tile floor. Mr. Sterling scurried after her like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Silence descended on the room. The doctor, looking pale and realized he might be implicated, excused himself quickly. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. My knees felt weak. I sat back down on the edge of the bed. Are you okay? Lydia asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. "I am fine," I said, though my hands were shaking. "Did we get it?" "We got it," Lydia said. The attempt to sign the new will, the lawyer admitting he hadn't met her, the outburst. "Judge Caldwell will grant the permanent conservatorship by Monday. She is done, Tessa." I turned to Grandma. She was watching us, her eyes bright and alert. The stroke symptoms seemed to have miraculously vanished. She pulled the oxygen tube away from her nose. "That woman," Eleanor said, her voice stronger now, "never did know when to fold a losing hand." I smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You played your part perfectly, Grandma." "I had good motivation," she said. She reached up and grabbed my collar, pulling me down close again. Her expression shifted. The triumph faded, replaced by a dark, urgent intensity. "Tessa," she whispered, so low that even Lydia couldn't hear. "Listen to me. It is deeper than we thought." "What do you mean?" I asked, frowning. "I saw the file Sterling had," she whispered. When he opened his briefcase, there was a list of names, not just Evan, other names, men, dates, payouts. I froze. "What are you saying?" Eleanor's eyes were wide, filled with a horror that went beyond family drama. "She does not just steal from the living, Tessa," Eleanor hissed. "She collects on the dead. Evan wasn't an accident, and he wasn't the first. She has been running this game for 20 years. It isn't just theft anymore. It is a serial kill count." I stared at her, the blood draining from my face. The room suddenly felt very cold. "She takes money from the dead," Eleanor repeated, her grip on my collar tightening. "And your father?" "I think your father signed the checks that paid for her silence on the first one." I pulled back, looking at my grandmother in shock. The victory of the morning evaporated, replaced by a terrifying new reality. We hadn't just caught a thief. We had cornered a monster, and my father had been feeding it. The fluorescent lights of Lydia Hart's office hummed with a sound that felt like a drill pressing into my temple. It was 3 a.m. We had been locked in this room for 14 hours, fueled by stale coffee and a growing, nauseating realization that we were not just dealing with a greedy stepmother. We were looking at a predator who had turned tragedy into a business model. The conference table was buried under mountains of paper. There were the documents from Eleanor's safety deposit box, combined with new records Lydia had pulled using her connections at the courthouse and a forensic accountant's deep dive into public insurance claims. What lay before us was not a family dispute. It was a graveyard. Lydia stood by the whiteboard, a red marker in her hand. She looked exhausted, her sharp bob slightly messy, but her eyes were wide with the adrenaline of the hunt. On the board, she had drawn a timeline. It stretched back 20 years, long before Vivian ever walked into the Calder home. "Look at the pattern, Tessa," Lydia said, her voice raspy. "It is mathematical. It is precise." I looked. The timeline was punctuated by names. 1998, Mark Salinger, a real estate developer in Phoenix. 2004, Evan Wright, an architect. 2014, Richard Calder, my father. "We found the Salinger file an hour ago," Lydia said, tapping the first name. Vivian was 24. She was his executive assistant. They were dating. Salinger was wealthy but leveraged. 6 months into the relationship, he had a freak accident. His brakes failed on a canyon road. He survived, but he suffered a traumatic brain injury. He required full-time care. Lydia picked up a document from the table and slid it toward me. "Look who held his power of attorney." I looked at the signature on the faded document. Vivian Miller, her maiden name. "She managed his care for 2 years," Lydia continued. "In that time, she liquidated his assets to pay for medical bills. When he finally died of complications, there was nothing left in the estate for his children, but there was a life insurance policy, $200,000. Sole beneficiary, Vivian Miller." I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. "Brakes do not just fail, Lydia." "They do if the line is cut," Lydia said grimly. "The police report noted unusual wear, but it was ruled an accident due to poor maintenance. She walked away clean." Then came Evan. I picked up the file for Evan Wright. I had seen the police report in the bank vault, but now we had the financial context. Evan hadn't just drowned, he had been dismantled. She met Evan 6 months after Salinger died, Lydia said. He was on the rise, had his own firm. Within a year, they were married. Within 2 years, he was isolated from his family. His mother filed a complaint with social services claiming Vivian was screening his calls. Then came the bankruptcy, and finally the canal. I looked at the autopsy photos, the bruising on his wrists. The report said he was drunk, but looking at the pattern now, it looked less like a stumble and more like a disposal. Another policy, I whispered, reading the insurance payout sheet. $150,000, paid 3 weeks after the funeral. She scales up, Lydia said. Salinger was the practice run, Evan was the refinement, and your father? Richard was the jackpot. She moved in, isolated him, took control of the finances. If Eleanor hadn't been watching, if she hadn't set up that trust, how long do you think your father would have lasted before he had a heart attack or a fall down the stairs? I stared at the timeline. The gap between Evan's death and my father's marriage to Vivian was larger than the others. 6 years. Why the wait? I asked. Why did she wait 6 years between Evan and Dad? She usually moves faster. Lydia hesitated. She looked down at a file she had been keeping separate from the others. It was a thin manila folder, battered and old. Tessa, Lydia said softly, this is the part you are not going to like. In fact, this is the part that is going to break your heart. Show me, I said. Lydia opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a civil lawsuit filed in the state of Arizona, 1 year after Evan's death. The plaintiff was Martha Wright, Evan's mother. She was suing Vivian for wrongful death and financial fraud. The case was strong. She had affidavits from neighbors who heard screaming. She had bank records showing Vivian draining the accounts. It looked like the moment justice would finally catch up to her. But the case never went to trial. It was settled out of court. Look at the settlement agreement, Lydia said. I read the document. The case was dismissed with prejudice in exchange for a payment of $75,000 to Martha Wright. A payoff. A bribe to make the grieving mother go away. Where did Vivian get $75,000? I asked. She had already spent the insurance money on a new car and condo. She was broke again. That is why she hunts. Lydia turned the page to the payment confirmation. Attached was a photocopy of a cashier's check. My breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The check was drawn from a personal account at Harborline Bank. The signature at the bottom, in blue ink, was familiar. I had seen it on my report cards. I had seen it on my birthday checks. I had seen it on the documents selling the car dealership. Richard Calder. The date on the check was 8 years ago, 2 years before my father met Vivian at a charity gala, 2 years before they started dating. No, I whispered. This is a mistake. Dad did not know her then. They met at the museum fundraiser. He told me. She told me. He knew her, Lydia said, her voice devoid of pity. Tessa, look at the date. This was during the time your father was expanding the dealerships into the Southwest. He spent a lot of time in Arizona. I sat back, feeling like I had been punched in the chest. The air left the room. My father hadn't just been a victim. He had been a savior. Vivian must have met him, spun him a sob story about a crazy mother-in-law who was harassing her after her tragic husband's death. She must have played the damsel in distress, the beautiful widow being persecuted, and my father, my kind, weak, gullible father, had opened his checkbook. He paid $75,000 to silence the woman who knew Vivian was a monster. He knew, I said, my voice shaking. He might not have known she killed him, but he knew there were accusations. He knew she was being sued for fraud, and he paid it off. He cleared her name so he could bring her home. He bought her, Lydia corrected. He paid her debts, and in exchange, she became his wife. He thought he was rescuing her. He did not realize he was importing a plague. This changed everything. For weeks, I had been operating on the premise that my father was an innocent bystander, A man bamboozled by a master manipulator. I wanted to save him. I wanted to wake him up. But you cannot wake someone up who is pretending to be asleep. He had known about the shadows in her past. He had known enough to write a check that equaled a year of college tuition, and he had hidden it from me. He had hidden it from everyone. When I complained about Vivian's weirdness, about her obsession with Evan's face, he hadn't just been dismissive. He had been covering his tracks. He knew exactly who Evan was because he had paid for the privilege of burying Evan's memory. "This makes him an accessory," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Technically, if we expose the insurance fraud, if we reopen the investigation into Evan's death, this check links him to the cover-up." Lydia nodded. She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. "That is the dilemma, Tessa. We have enough here to go to the district attorney. We can hand them the Salinger case, the Evan Wright case, and the current theft from your grandmother. They will connect the dots. They will charge her with grand larceny, insurance fraud, and likely reopen the homicide investigation." "But," I said, finishing her thought, "they will find the check. They will ask why Richard Calder paid hush money to the victim's mother. They will drag him into the interrogation room. Even if he is not charged, his reputation will be incinerated. The board at Calder Motors will oust him. He will be the man who funded a black widow." I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Port Armitage was sleeping, oblivious to the rot in its high-rises. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked like him. I had his eyes. I had his chin. But did I have his weakness? I wanted to vomit. I loved him. He was my dad. He had braided my hair when I was little. He had taught me to drive. But he had also looked at a woman accused of destroying a man, and instead of running, he had reached for his wallet. "We could just sue for the money," I said, testing the coward's way out. "We could enforce the prenup, strip her of the assets, kick her out. We do not have to go to the police." "If we do that," Lydia said, "she walks away. She moves to another city. She finds another Mark Salinger, another Evan Wright. She kills again, and next time, there won't be an Eleanor to stop her." I closed my eyes. The weight of the choice was crushing. Save my father's image, or stop a killer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message. I pulled it out. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the content made it clear. "Grandma?" She must have borrowed a nurse's phone or smuggled one in. The message was short. "Lydia told me about the check. I know you are hesitating. You are wondering if you can save him." I stared at the screen. A second message popped up. "He made his choice 8 years ago. He chose a pretty lie over the ugly truth. If he signed the check to cover for a monster, then he bought a ticket to the show. Let him hear the indictment. Tessa, let him see what he paid for." I lowered the phone. Eleanor was right. She was brutal, but she was right. My father had made a transaction. He had traded his integrity for Vivian. If I protected him now, I was just continuing the cycle of silence that had killed Evan. I turned back to Lydia. The indecision was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Do it," I said. Lydia paused, her pen hovering over the file. "You are sure? Once I call the DA, there is no taking it back. Your father will be devastated." "My father," I said, my voice steady, "has been living in a house built on a graveyard. It is time he saw the bones." I walked back to the table and picked up the file with the check. I looked at his signature one last time. It looked weak, shaky. "Pack it all up," I ordered. "The Salinger records, the police reports, the bank transfers, and the check. We are not just filing a civil suit. Lydia, we are filing a criminal complaint." Lydia nodded, a grim respect in her eyes. "I will draft the executive summary for the prosecutor. We can have it on the district attorney's desk by 8 o'clock this morning." "Good," I said, "and add one more thing to the file." "What?" "The video from the hospital," I said. "The one where she threatened Eleanor. It proves she is desperate. It proves she is escalating. If the DA needs a reason to arrest her immediately, that video shows she is an active danger to the public." Lydia began typing furiously. I sat down and watched the sunrise bleed into the sky. It was a gray, bleak dawn. I thought about the day Vivian moved in. I thought about Dad's smile. So eager to please. So happy to have a beautiful woman on his arm. I realized now that his happiness was a rental, paid for with blood money. He was going to hate me. When the police knocked on the door, when the handcuffs clicked onto Vivian's wrists, when the reporters started digging and found his name on that settlement check, he would look at me with betrayal. But I wasn't doing this for his love anymore. I was doing it for the truth. "Tessa," Lydia said, breaking the silence. "The courier is on the way. It is done." "Thank you," I said. I stood up and buttoned my coat. "I'm going to go home. I need to be there when the police arrive. I need to look her in the eye when she realizes that the ghost she was so afraid of has finally come to collect." "And your father?" Lydia asked. "I will make him coffee," I said. "And I will sit with him, and when they read the charges, I will make sure he listens to every single word." I walked out of the office, leaving the warmth of the heater for the biting cold of the morning air. The war was over. Now, we just had to survive the fallout. The kitchen of the Ridgeline Estates house was a masterpiece of architectural lighting and cold surfaces. It was designed to look warm, with its amber under-cabinet LEDs and hand-scraped walnut floors. But the acres of white marble countertops always felt like an autopsy table waiting for a body. I stood there at 11 o'clock at night, listening to the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. I had set the stage with the precision of a crime scene photographer. I poured a glass of water and placed it on the island. Behind it, leaned casually against a heavy wooden knife block, was my phone. The screen was dark. The brightness turned all the way down, but the camera lens was unobstructed, angled perfectly to capture the space where someone would stand if they were getting a glass of wine. I tapped the record button, watched the tiny red timer start its silent count, and then turned my back to the island, waiting. I was not here to fight. I was here to bait a trap. I heard her before I saw her, the soft swish-swish of silk against silk, the click of a ring against a fingernail. Vivian entered the kitchen like she was stepping onto a yacht. She was wearing a floor-length robe of champagne-colored silk, her hair unpinned but perfectly brushed, cascading over her shoulders. In her hand, she held a large crystal goblet filled halfway with a dark, heavy Cabernet. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes, rimmed with the slight puffiness of stress but hardened by alcohol, narrowed. "Richard said you wanted to talk," she said. Her voice was not a shout. It was a low, smooth drawl, confident and dismissive. "He begged me to come down here. He said I owed it to the family to give you a chance to apologize." She walked past me to the wine fridge, refilling her glass without offering me anything. The bottle clinked against the glass rim, a sharp, fragile sound in the quiet room. "I do want to talk," I said, keeping my voice soft, submissive. I leaned against the counter, making myself look smaller. I wanted to say, "I am sorry about the scene at the hospital and the party. I was emotional. I have been under a lot of stress at work, and seeing Grandma sick, it just broke me." Vivian took a long sip of wine, her eyes watching me over the rim. She savored the apology like it was a rare vintage. She believed it because she wanted to believe it. In her world, people eventually bent the knee to her because she was inevitable. "You embarrassed us, Tessa," she said, turning to face me, positioning herself exactly where I knew she would, center frame. "Your father was mortified. Do you know how hard I worked to maintain his reputation? And you storm in there with some cheap lawyer and make wild accusations." "I know," I lied. "I was scared. I thought she was dying. I panicked." Vivian let out a short, derisive laugh. "You always panic. You are hysterical, just like your mother was. From what Richard tells me, weak." She leaned back against the island, relaxed now. The apology had disarmed her. She felt safe in her own kitchen, with her husband asleep upstairs and her stepdaughter looking defeated in front of her. "I am trying to be better," I said, looking down at my hands. Then I looked up, locking eyes with her. "But Vivian, can I ask you one thing? Just so I can understand?" "What?" she sighed, bored. "It is about the way I look," I said. "Uncle Arthur, at the party, he said I looked like Evan. That is why you hate me, isn't it? Because I look like him." The air in the room changed instantly. It went from heavy to suffocating. Vivian went still. The glass halted halfway to her mouth. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the wine. She just stared at me. And in the amber light, her pupils seemed to dilate, swallowing the iris. "You have no idea," she whispered. "Was he—" I hesitated, playing the part of the confused daughter. "Was he the love of your life? Is that why it hurts to look at me?" Vivian laughed again, but this time the sound was jagged. "Love? You think this is about romance? You really are a child." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the expensive wine and the underlying scent of her anger. "He was a project," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "He was beautiful, perfect potential, but he was flawed. He was stubborn. He refused to listen. I tried to mold him. Tessa, I tried to make him into something great, but he fought me every step of the way." She reached out and touched a lock of hair near my face. I forced myself not to flinch. "And then I walked into this house," she continued, her eyes unfocused, looking through me, not at me. "And there you were, 12 years old, a blank canvas, and you had his face. It was like the universe was giving me a second chance, a do-over. I thought, if I can dress her right, if I can fix her hair, if I can teach her how to stand, maybe I can get the version of him that works." I felt bile rise in my throat. It wasn't just hatred, it was a Frankenstein complex. She had spent 10 years trying to turn me into a better version of her dead husband. "That is why you bought me the flannel shirts," I said quietly. "The leather jackets. You were dressing a ghost." "And you ruined it," she spat, dropping her hand. "You put on those hideous business suits. You pulled your hair back. You started arguing with me. Every time you opened your mouth, you sounded just like him, whining, complaining. This isn't fair. Vivian, you are spending too much money, Vivian." It was like living with a haunting. "So you hit me," I said, "to make the ghost stop talking." "I hit you because you needed to be corrected," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "Just like he did. He never knew when to shut up either, always asking about the accounts, always crying about his mother." My heart stopped. She had just admitted it. She compared hitting me to hitting him. "Is that what happened to him, Vivian?" I asked, pushing the knife in deeper. "Did he ask too many questions about the money? Is that why he ended up in the canal?" Vivian froze. Her eyes snapped back to the present. For a second, I thought she would stop. I thought her survival instinct would kick in. But the wine was doing its work, and her arrogance was a powerful drug. "He ended up in the canal because he was a drunk," she sneered. "He was a loser who could not handle the pressure of a successful wife. He drank himself to death." "But you didn't mind the payout," I said. Vivian smiled. It was a cruel, thin curving of her lips. "Compensation," she said. "That is what it was. Compensation for my time, for my wasted years. Do you know how much debt he put me in? He owed me. And when he died, well, the insurance company finally balanced the ledger. $150,000, I said. That is a lot of balance." "It was not enough," she said, her voice hard. "It is never enough for what I have to put up with. People like you. You take and you take. You drain my energy. Richard is the same. I have to manage everything. The house, the bills, the image. And what do I get? Ingratitude." "So you take it yourself," I said. "From Dad's accounts, from Grandma's trust. Just like you took it from Evan, and from Mark Salinger before him." Vivian dropped her glass. It hit the marble countertop, but it didn't break. It tipped over, spilling a dark red river of wine across the white stone. It looked like blood. "Who told you about Salinger?" she whispered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a lethal sharpness. "You left a paper trail." "Vivian," I said, my voice steady. "Grandma kept everything. The Salinger settlement, the Evan Wright police report, the check Dad wrote to Evan's mother to shut her up. We know about the pattern. We know you live off the insurance of men you destroy." Vivian stared at me. Her chest was heaving. The realization hit her. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't submitting. I was dissecting her. "You little bitch," she hissed. She lunged. It was instinct. Her hand flew up. Fingers curled into claws, aiming for my face, the face she hated, the face of the man she had killed. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there and spoke 5 words. Section 9, the forfeiture clause. Her hand stopped inches from my cheek. She froze, teetering on the edge of violence, her breathing ragged. Her eyes were wild, searching mine. She knew. She knew about the prenup. She knew that if she touched me, if she left one single mark on me tonight, she would lose the house, the shares, the alimony, everything. Her hand trembled in the air. Slowly, painfully, she lowered it. She stepped back, gripping the edge of the island so hard her knuckles turned white. "You think you are clever," she whispered, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You think you have won because you found some old papers? Richard will never believe you. He loves me. He needs me." "He needed the woman he thought you were," I said. "He does not need the woman who cashed in 2 dead boyfriends." "He knows," she screamed, losing control. "He knows I have a past. He knows I'm tough. That is why he married me, because I am the only one strong enough to run his pathetic life. If you try to show him those papers, I will tell him you forged them. I will tell him you are trying to frame me because you want his money. Who do you think he will believe? The daughter who abandoned him for her career? Or the wife who sleeps in his bed every night?" "I think," I said, glancing briefly at the dark phone screen behind her, "he will believe the woman who admitted that my face makes her want to hit me just like she hit the dead man in the canal." Vivian followed my gaze. She looked at the knife block. She saw the phone. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a corpse. She lunged for the phone, snatching it up. "Give that to me!" she shrieked. I didn't fight her. I let her take it. She frantically tapped the screen, trying to unlock it, but it was biometrically locked. She couldn't delete anything. She couldn't stop the recording that was currently uploading to the cloud in real time. "It is already sent, Vivian," I said softly. "It is on a secure server. It is with my lawyer, and tomorrow morning, it will be with the district attorney." She stared at the phone in her hand, then at me. For the first time, I saw the true face of Vivian Calder. It wasn't the polished socialite. It wasn't the grieving widow. It was a cornered animal, vicious and terrified. "You just destroyed this family," she whispered. "No," I said, walking toward the door. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who has been breaking the furniture in the dark." I stopped at the doorway and looked back. She was standing in the pool of spilled wine, clutching my locked phone like a lifeline. "Enjoy the wine, Vivian," I said. "It is the last bottle you will ever drink in this house." I walked out of the kitchen, listening to the sound of her screaming my name, followed by the shatter of glass against the wall. I didn't stop. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove to the end of the driveway. I pulled over and took out my tablet. I opened the cloud drive. There it was, a video file, timestamped 2 minutes ago. I pressed play. The image was crisp. The audio was crystal clear. He ended up in the canal because he was a drunk. Compensation, that is what it was. I hit you because you needed to be corrected, just like he did. I paused the video. I looked at the dark house on the hill. My father was sleeping in there, unaware that the woman lying next to him was a ghost eater. Tomorrow, he would wake up. Tomorrow, the police would come. But for tonight, the truth was safe in my hands, glowing on a screen in the dark. I drove away, leaving Ridgeline Estates behind me, knowing that I would never set foot in it again as a victim. The conference room at Marwood and Lane was a glass cage suspended 20 stories above the gray streets of Port Armitage. It was designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of black granite that looked like a tombstone, and the air conditioning was set to a temperature that kept everyone awake and uncomfortable. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by Lydia Hart and my grandmother. Eleanor sat in her wheelchair, a blanket over her lap, looking frail but vibrating with a terrifying stillness. Across from us sat the opposition. Vivian swept in 5 minutes late, wearing a white suit that cost more than my car. She looked immaculate, a vision of wronged innocence. Next to her was not Mr. Sterling, the cheap lawyer from the hospital, but a new man, Harrison Cole, a high-priced defense attorney known for burying scandals. My father, Richard, walked in behind them. He looked gray, his shoulders slumped, avoiding my eyes as he took the seat between his wife and his lawyer. "Let us make this quick," Harrison Cole said, opening a slim leather folder. "My client, Mrs. Calder, is prepared to be generous. She understands that Tessa is emotional. We are willing to discuss a small adjustment to the monthly allowance from the trust, provided Tessa signs a non-disparagement agreement and ceases her harassment." Vivian smiled at me. It was a benevolent, pitying smile. She really thought we were here to beg for crumbs. She thought the video from the kitchen was a bluff, or that I hadn't had the guts to show it to anyone yet. Lydia Hart did not smile. She stood up, pressed a button on the console in front of her, and the wall-sized screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "We are not here to negotiate an allowance, Mr. Cole," Lydia said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "We are here to review the evidence for the immediate termination of your client's marriage and the forfeiture of all assets under the Calder family prenuptial agreement." "Preposterous," Vivian scoffed. "Richard, tell them to stop this nonsense." "Play the video," Lydia said. The screen lit up. It was grainy footage, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. It showed the hallway of the Kingsley Grand Hotel. In the video, Vivian was gripping my arm. You could see the tension in her fingers, the way she was dragging me. She shoved me into the restroom door. The timestamp ticked forward by 4 minutes. Then, the door opened. I stumbled out. My hand was covering my cheek. Vivian followed, smoothing her hair, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror with a chilling nonchalance. Lydia clicked a remote. Next to the video, a high-resolution photo appeared. It was the selfie I had taken the next morning. The bruise was purple and ugly, the cut from the ring clearly visible. "That is edited," Vivian snapped immediately, though her hand tightened on the table. "She painted that bruise on, and the video shows nothing but a mother trying to have a private conversation with a difficult stepdaughter. We have the metadata for the photo proving it was taken 12 hours after the party," Lydia said calmly. "And we have a sworn affidavit from the hotel security manager confirming the authenticity of the footage." "It is circumstantial," Harrison Cole waved a hand dismissively. "A bruise proves nothing. She could have walked into a door." "Perhaps," Lydia said, "but let us look at the document your client signed 10 years ago." She slid a paper across the granite table. It was the prenuptial agreement. "Section 9, Lydia read aloud. "The forfeiture clause. If the spouse is found to have committed any act of physical violence against the principal or his lineal descendants, or is found to have engaged in financial malfeasance to the detriment of the family estate, all rights to alimony, marital assets, and residency are immediately and irrevocably forfeited." Vivian went still. She stared at the paper. She had signed it. She had probably signed it without reading it, too arrogant to believe she would ever be caught. "You have no proof of violence," Vivian hissed. "A grainy video is not proof." "Then let us talk about the financial malfeasance," Lydia said. She tapped the console again. The screen changed. It was now a spreadsheet, a complex web of red lines and numbers. "This," Lydia pointed to a column of figures, "is a record of transfers from Richard Calder's personal holding account, starting 4 years ago, every month, on the 14th and the 28th, Sums ranging from $8,000 to $9,000 were moved to an entity called EW Investments, LLC. My father looked up. He squinted at the screen. I recall those. Vivian said they were for the portfolio management fees. EW Investments, LLC is a shell company registered in Delaware, Lydia continued. The sole signatory is Vivian Calder. The funds were not invested. Richard, they were withdrawn in cash or transferred to offshore accounts in the Caymans within 48 hours of receipt. That is a lie, Vivian said, her voice rising an octave. I was managing a private fund for our retirement. Richard knows I handle the finances because he is too incompetent to do it himself. And the name? Lydia asked. EW. Does that stand for early withdrawal? Or does it stand for Evan Wright? The room went silent. Vivian flinched as if she had been slapped. Evan Wright, Lydia said, pulling up a death certificate on the screen. Your late husband, the man who drowned in a canal with a blood alcohol level of 0.15, the man whose life insurance policy, $150,000, you cashed 3 weeks later. This is irrelevant, Harrison Cole barked, standing up. My client's past is not on trial here. This is a harassment tactic. It is relevant. Eleanor spoke for the first time. Her voice was not the weak whisper of the invalid she had pretended to be. It was strong, clear, and laced with 40 years of suppressed rage. Because it establishes the pattern. Eleanor reached into her lap and pulled out a single, yellowed piece of paper. She slid it across the table toward my father. Look at it, Richard, Eleanor commanded. My father picked up the paper. It was a photocopy of a cashier's check. This is dated 8 years ago, Eleanor said. 2 years before you married her. $75,000, payable to Martha Wright. Dad stared at the check. His hands started to shake. Who is Martha Wright, Richard? Eleanor asked. Dad didn't answer. He couldn't. She was Evan's mother, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. She was suing Vivian for wrongful death and fraud. She was going to expose everything, and you paid her off. Vivian turned to look at my father. Her eyes were wide, pleading. Richard, do not let them twist this. You helped me. You were my hero. She was a crazy old woman who was stalking me. You saved me. He bought your silence, Lydia corrected. He used family money to settle a claim that accused you of killing your husband for insurance money. Richard, did you know she killed him? Or did you just think she was a victim of bad luck? My father's voice cracked. He looked at me, his eyes wet and terrified. She told me his mother was unstable. She said she needed a fresh start. I just wanted to help her. I loved her. You loved the lie, I said. And you paid $75,000 to keep the truth from coming out. You knew there were questions about Evan's death. You knew, and you brought her into our house anyway. Dad slumped back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. The image of the strong patriarch crumbled, leaving behind a weak man who had traded his integrity for a pretty face. This is ancient history, Vivian snapped, trying to regain control. You have no proof of anything illegal happening now. You cannot invoke the prenup based on a settlement check from 8 years ago. You are right, Lydia said. We need proof of current malice, proof that you are a danger to this family today. She looked at me. I nodded. Lydia pressed the button one last time. The screen went black for a second, then flickered on with the high-definition footage from my kitchen. The timestamp was last night, 11:15 post-meridian. The audio filled the room, crystal clear. He ended up in the canal because he was a drunk. Compensation. That is what it was. Compensation for my time. Vivian on the screen took a sip of wine. I hit you because you needed to be corrected. Just like he did. He never knew when to shut up either. In the conference room, the real Vivian went pale. She looked at the screen, watching her own arrogance destroy her. He owed me, and when he died, well, the insurance company finally balanced the ledger. So you take it yourself, from Dad's accounts, from Grandma's trust. It is never enough for what I have to put up with. The video ended with the sound of the glass shattering against the wall. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Even Harrison Cole looked down at his papers, realizing he was defending an indefensible position. My father slowly lowered his hands from his face. He looked at the screen. Then he turned his head slowly to look at Vivian. It wasn't love in his eyes anymore. It wasn't even confusion. It was horror. "You," Dad whispered. "You said it was an accident. You swore to me he fell." Vivian looked at him, and for a second, I thought she would beg. But she didn't. She looked at the screen, at the documents, at me, and she realized there was no way out. The cornered animal didn't whimper. It snarled. "Oh, grow up." "Richard," Vivian spat. The mask was gone completely now. Her face was twisted into a sneer of pure contempt. "He was a drunk. You are a fool. You are all weak. You think you saved me? I saved myself. I did what I had to do to survive. And you?" She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You were just the retirement plan, and a boring one at that." Dad flinched as if she had struck him. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The woman he had defended, the woman he had paid $75,000 to protect, was looking at him like he was an insect. Lydia Hart stood up. She didn't look at Vivian. She looked at Harrison Cole. "Mr. Cole," Lydia said professionally, "based on the evidence presented, specifically the admission of assault against a lineal descendant and the confession regarding the misappropriation of funds, we are hereby invoking Section 9 of the prenuptial agreement." She slid a final document across the table. "This is a notice of forfeiture, effective immediately. Vivian Calder is stripped of all interest in the Calder estate. She is to vacate the Ridgeline Estates property within 12 hours. Her access to all joint accounts has already been terminated as of 9 o'clock this morning." Cole picked up the document. He read it. He didn't argue. He closed his folder. "Furthermore," Lydia continued, her voice hardening, "we represent the Ward Family Preservation Trust. Given the evidence of undue influence and financial elder abuse, we are activating the emergency protection protocols. All voting shares in Calder Motors Group that were transferred to the VRC Trust are hereby reclaimed by the Ward Trust." She turned to my father. "And Richard," she said softly, "because you are currently under the influence of a hostile party, and because your financial decisions have demonstrated a lack of capacity to protect the family interests, the Ward Trust is exercising its right to bypass you. The voting power now resides solely with the successor trustee." Dad looked up, confused. "Who?" "Me," I said. I stood up. I didn't feel like a daughter anymore. I felt like the CEO of a crisis. "I am taking control of the company, Dad," I said. "Until this mess is cleaned up, until every dollar she stole is accounted for." "But," Dad stammered. "Tessa." "And there is one more thing," Lydia interrupted. "We are not just filing for divorce and restitution." She picked up a heavy, sealed envelope from her briefcase. "This is a copy of the evidentiary file we have compiled. It contains the Salinger records, the Evan Wright police reports, the settlement check, the bank transfer logs, and the video confession from last night." Vivian's eyes widened. She stared at the envelope. "We are submitting this to the District Attorney's Office for the County of Port Armitage," Lydia said. "And we are sending a copy to the Phoenix Police Department's Homicide Division." "No," Vivian whispered. "You cannot. That is privileged." "Confessions of a crime are not privileged when they are made to a victim. Not a lawyer," Lydia said. "You admitted to insurance fraud. You admitted to assault. And you strongly implied a role in a suspicious death." Vivian stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "Richard!" she screamed. "Stop them! They are going to send me to prison. You cannot let them do this." My father looked at her. He looked at the check on the table, the $75,000 he had paid to buy a lie. He looked at me, the daughter with the bruised cheek and the face of the man Vivian had destroyed. He took a deep breath. It was a shaky, rattling sound. "I cannot stop them," Dad said, his voice barely a whisper. "I do not think I want to." "You coward!" Vivian shrieked. She lunged toward the table, grabbing for the envelope, but she never reached it. The door to the conference room opened. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit walked in. They didn't look at the view. They didn't look at the granite table. They looked straight at Vivian. "Vivian Calder?" the detective asked. Vivian froze. She looked at the window, as if contemplating running through the glass. Then she looked at me. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You will always be just a cheap copy." "Maybe," I said, meeting her gaze with eyes that were dry and cold. "But at least I am not a murderer." The detective stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked, a sharp, final sound that echoed in the glass room. "Vivian Calder," he said, "you are under arrest for insurance fraud, grand larceny, and assault. You have the right to remain silent." I watched as they turned her around. I watched the cuffs lock onto her wrists, the same wrists that had worn diamonds bought with dead men's money. I watched my father bury his head in his arms and weep. And I watched Eleanor, sitting in her wheelchair, close her eyes, and let out a long, slow sigh of relief. The check had cleared, the debt was paid, and the ghost of Evan Wright could finally rest. The door to the conference room did not just open, it was breached. Lydia Hart had timed this with the precision of a demolition expert. Just as the weight of the video confession settled over the room, a procession of people walked in. They were not uniformed police officers, at least not at the front. Leading the pack was a man in a charcoal suit holding a briefcase that looked heavy enough to crack the pavement. Behind him were 2 grim-faced individuals wearing lanyards with the emblem of the State Insurance Commission, and flanked behind them was the Assistant District Attorney for Port Armitage. The air in the room shifted from civil dispute to criminal investigation in a single heartbeat. The man in the charcoal suit placed a stack of files on the granite table. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the stone was louder than a gavel strike. "Vivian Calder," the Assistant District Attorney said. His voice was dry, devoid of any theatricality. "My name is Arthur Vance. We are opening an official inquiry based on new evidence provided by Marwood and Lane, corroborating cross-state files regarding the suspicious death of Evan Wright and the vehicular incapacitation of Mark Salinger." Vivian stood up. Her movements were jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. "This is harassment," she said, her voice trembling. "These are closed cases. They were accidents. You cannot just march in here and—" "We can." The investigator from the Insurance Commission cut in. "When we receive evidence of a pattern of serial beneficiary fraud and potential homicide for financial gain, the statute of limitations on the fraud investigation resets upon the discovery of new assets being targeted, in this case, the attempted misappropriation of the Calder estate." Vivian looked at the files. She saw the names, Salinger, Wright, and now Calder. "I did nothing wrong," Vivian screamed. The polished veneer cracked completely, revealing the hysteria underneath. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is doing this. She is punishing me. You are all persecuting a woman just because she dared to love 2 men who had tragic luck. Is it a crime to be a widow? Is it a crime to try to rebuild a life?" "It is a crime to ensure you become a widow," Lydia said coldly. "You are jealous," Vivian shrieked, turning to my father. "Richard, look at them. They want to destroy me because I am beautiful, because I am strong. They hate that I survived. Tell them, Richard, tell them I am a good wife." My father did not speak. He was staring at the $75,000 check still lying on the table, the proof that he had paid for this nightmare. Then, movement from the corner of the room drew everyone's attention. Eleanor. For the last 3 weeks, my grandmother had played the part of the fading matriarch. She had sat in wheelchairs, feigned confusion, and spoken in whispers. She had let Vivian believe she was a relic, easily discarded. But now, Eleanor pushed the wheelchair back. She did not ask for help. She placed her hands on the armrests and stood up. She did not wobble. She did not reach for her cane, which was leaning against the wall 5 feet away. She stood straight, her spine as rigid as a steel beam, regaining the height and presence that had terrified board members for 40 years. "I have played the part of the senile old woman long enough," Eleanor said. Her voice was not weak, it was a command. She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a document bound in blue legal backing. It was not a copy, it was an original, bearing the raised seal of a notary and a timestamp from 3 months ago, long before the stroke scare, long before Vivian dragged that fake doctor into the hospital room. "You thought you were racing against my death, Vivian," Eleanor said, walking slowly but steadily toward the table. "But you were actually racing against a clock I set 10 years ago." She slammed the document down in front of Vivian's lawyer, Harrison Cole. "This," Eleanor announced, "is the final, irrevocable amendment to the Ward Family Preservation Trust. It was filed and recorded the day I noticed you changing Richard's medication. It contains a specific trigger clause." Lydia picked up the narrative, knowing exactly what was on the page. The clause states that in the event of documented physical assault against Tessa Calder by any beneficiary or spouse of a beneficiary, the trust does not just freeze assets, it executes an immediate transfer of title. Harrison Cole opened the document. His eyes scanned the page, and his face went pale. He closed the folder. He knew the game was over. "What does that mean?" Vivian demanded, looking between the lawyer and Eleanor. "What does it mean?" "It means," Eleanor said, leaning over the table, her eyes locking onto Vivian's, "that as of the moment you struck Tessa across the face at the Kingsley Grand, you did not just break a prenup, you triggered a liquidation event, the house in Ridgeline Estates, the vacation home in Aspen, and 51% of the voting stock in Calder Motors Group." Eleanor paused, letting the silence stretch. "They do not belong to Richard anymore, and they certainly do not belong to you. As of the timestamp on that video evidence, they belong to Tessa." Vivian gasped. She looked at the house keys sitting on the table next to her clutch. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger. "You cannot do that," Vivian whispered. Richard is the owner." "Richard is a liability," Eleanor said, not looking at her son. "Richard compromised the family security by bringing a predator into our home. The trust was designed to protect the assets from exactly this scenario. Richard is bypassed. Tessa is the owner. She owns the roof over your head. She owns the chair you are sitting in. She owns the company you were trying to sell." My father made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Mom," he pleaded, looking up at Eleanor with wet red eyes. "Mom, how could you? I am your son. I am your only son." Eleanor turned to him. There was no softness in her face. There was love, yes, but it was the hard, surgical love of a parent who has to amputate a limb to save the body. "I know you are my son, Richard," Eleanor said, "and I love you. But you made a choice, 8 years ago. You chose to protect her. You chose to hide her secrets because it was easier than facing the truth. You chose your comfort over your integrity." She pointed at me. "I had to make a choice too," Eleanor said. "I chose to protect the granddaughter who was willing to take a beating to find the truth. You chose the monster. Richard, I chose the future. That is the decision, and it is final." The assistant district attorney stepped forward. "Mrs. Calder, we have heard enough. Based on the video confession regarding the insurance payouts and the evidence of financial fraud against a vulnerable elder, we are placing you under arrest." He nodded to the officers. Vivian scrambled back, knocking her expensive chair over. No, you cannot. I need to call. I need to—" "You are represented by counsel," the DA said, glancing at Harrison Cole, who was busy packing his briefcase, clearly engaging in damage control for his own reputation. "You can consult him at the station." The officers moved in. They were not gentle. They pulled Vivian's arms behind her back. The click, click, click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. It sounded like the final tumblers of a safe falling into place. Vivian struggled, her hair falling across her face. The perfect platinum helmet finally ruined. She looked wild. She looked at the DA, then at Eleanor, and finally, she fixed her gaze on me. The hate in her eyes was toxic. It was pure distilled venom. "You think you won?" she hissed, straining against the officer's grip. "You think you are special? You are just a mirror. You will look in the mirror every day for the rest of your life, and you will see him. You will see Evan. You will never escape me because you are wearing the face of the man I killed." The room gasped. She had said it. In her rage, in her desire to hurt me one last time, she had let the truth slip out in front of witnesses. The man I killed. I stood up. I walked around the massive granite table until I was standing 2 feet away from her. I looked at the bruise on my cheek, a faint shadow under the makeup, and then I looked at her. "You are right, Vivian," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I do have his face. I have his eyes. I have his jaw." I leaned in closer. "But there is one difference between me and Evan," I whispered. "He never had a chance to defend himself against you. He never saw you coming, but I did, and I not only saw you coming, I held the door open for you and watched you walk right into your own grave." Vivian lunged at me, snapping her teeth, but the officers yanked her back. "Get her out of here," the DA ordered. They dragged her toward the door. She was screaming now, a stream of profanity and accusations, sounding less like a socialite and more like the desperate criminal she had always been. As the door closed behind her, cutting off her screams, the silence that rushed back into the room was heavy. My father sat slumped in his chair. He looked like a man whose skeleton had been removed. He slowly lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were pleading, desperate for some scrap of the daughter who used to fix his problems. "Tessa," he whispered, "please, the files, the investigation into Evan." "What about them, Dad?" I asked. "You have to hold them back," he begged. "If they investigate the payoff, if they trace that check, I will be ruined. Everyone will know I paid her off. I will lose my standing at the club. The board will force me out completely. Please, Tessa, for the family name, just give the DA the fraud evidence. Do not give them the homicide file. Do not give them the check." He was begging me to be complicit, even now, after everything. He was asking me to help him bury the body. I looked at the thick envelope in Lydia's hand, the envelope that contained justice for a man I never knew, but whose face I wore. "I cannot do that," I said. "Why?" he cried. "She is gone. She is arrested. Why do you need to destroy me too?" "Because Evan Wright is dead," I said, "and Mark Salinger is dead, and they do not have voices anymore. They only have the truth." I reached out and took the envelope from Lydia. I walked over to the assistant district attorney and placed it firmly in his hands. "This contains the settlement check signed by Richard Calder," I said clearly, "and the full timeline of the cover-up. We expect a full investigation into all parties involved." My father let out a sob and buried his face in his hands. "I am sorry, Dad," I said, looking down at him. "But I am done choosing what gets hidden in the dark. You bought the lie. Now you have to pay the bill." I turned away from him. I walked over to the window where Eleanor and Lydia were standing. Below us, 20 stories down, the lights of a police cruiser flashed red and blue against the gray pavement. I watched as a small figure in a white suit was guided into the back seat. Eleanor reached out and took my hand. Her grip was warm. "You did good, Tessa," she said softly. "You did good." "It is over," Lydia said, closing her briefcase. "The transfer of assets is already being processed. You are the majority shareholder of Calder Motors as of 5 minutes ago. The house is yours. You have a board meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." I looked down at the street one last time as the police car pulled away, merging into the traffic, carrying Vivian Calder away to a place where her charm and her lies would no longer be legal tender. I touched my cheek. It still hurt, but the pain felt different now. It didn't feel like shame. It felt like the ache of a muscle that had been worked too hard, the soreness of a victory won in the trenches. "I am ready," I said. I turned my back on the window, on the police car, and on the weeping man at the table. I looked at my grandmother and my lawyer, the 2 women who had helped me build an army out of paper and patience. The slap that was meant to put me in my place had done exactly that. It had put me in the chair at the head of the table. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, conditioned air of the office. It tasted clean. "Let us get to work," I said. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your country or city. Let's see how far Tessa's story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. Your support means the world to us.